business, delegates, because we do want to be out of here today. The hotel is only booked for today. We've no booking for tomorrow. And we're going to start where we left off when we adjourned yesterday afternoon, dealing with party affairs. And when we adjourned, we had motion number 77 had been moved and seconded, and the amendment to motion 77 had been moved and seconded, and motion number 79 and the amendment had been moved and seconded, and I had called speakers, and what I was hoping to do was to compartmentalise the motions in order to avoid confusion. And I hope we had taken all the speakers on motions 77 and 79. And then we proceeded to have motion 78 moved and seconded. And then we adjourned. So I want to invite any speakers now offering on motion 78. Again, compartmentalising. Yes, Delegate. And again, can I remind everybody to please state your name and branch or whatever. And it's 1 minute for speakers.
Evan Ryan, UCC and Wexford Town branches. Comrades, I'm proud to speak in favour of this motion today. I think it's an excellent motion. It will do a lot to democratise our party. Labour as a party has an excellent record on democracy. But something else we have an excellent record on. We have an excellent record on getting great senators into the party. Like what this motion is about strengthening party democracy. It's about giving more candidates the opportunity to run, giving more candidates the opportunity to form debate, to challenge to challenge different leadership candidates. What it's about is about allowing ourselves the opportunity to listen, to agree, to disagree with these candidates. It's not about who you back or who you don't back to be our next leader. It's about allowing ourselves to pick excellent candidates when, if and when they arise. It's important to me as a party member that our party prospers into the future. It's important to remember that the cause of Ireland is the cause of Labour. The cause of Labour is the cause of Ireland. A strong Labour Party is good for this country, and we need a strong Labour Party. We need the best leadership candidates. We need the best leaders we can get. When we look at some of our excellent senators, people like Mary Robinson, people like Michael D. Higgins historically, who've done amazing work from the Seanad, I think when you look into the 21st century, when you look at new politics, there's a lot of ways of doing things. There were aspersions cast yesterday that senators are very, I suppose, neutered, for want of a better word, in what they can do. But we have spokespersons, we can have Dáil leaders. Sinn Féin had a Dáil leader for years when their leader didn't sit in the Dáil. It's completely doable. And if you look at, the success of Sinn Féin, even since. So to summarise, it's not about who you want for leader. It's about empowering our members to back the best person for leadership. Senators can and will broaden the dialogue when it comes to elections. And Levor Dáil, votáil son rún seachta hocht aniu. Gurf míle maithagat as och sé seachlum.
Thank you, Evan. And I misled you before you spoke. It's 2 minutes, sorry, not 1 minute. 2 minutes. I hope I didn't curtail you. It was more precise anyway. Now, any further speakers now, please, on motion number 78? Mick?
Good morning, delegates. Mick Sweeney from Hoth Sutton Branch, Dublin Bay North. In spite of the reasons given by the mover, I think, last speaker, I have the gravest reservations about proceeding along the lines suggested, because it sends a bad message to everyone, including the membership, that we as a party are happy to downsize and not to have representation in the main legislative body that we have. We won't have people, we won't have a leader. If we decide to go outside Dáil Éireann, we won't have a leader to talk to directly in the House to challenge the government of the day or other political parties. It also shows, the comparison with Sinn Féin and others who may or may not. We could have a comparison with Renew Ireland. I saw their leader on TV. You can be sure, with 7 TDs, we've got very little airtime, certainly in the first couple of years after the last election. Nobody's going to give us the type of time that Renew Ireland are getting and other unrepresentative groups. So the more we have a mindset that we go outside of our parliamentary party, the bigger the message we are sending is that we accept failure of ourselves to convince enough people to vote for us in order to implement our policies. I strongly urge people to vote against Motion 78. I probably was well-intentioned, but I feel that there's more dangers to us. It would keep us permanently in the situation of just about existing, if not dying altogether. Thank you, delegates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. Any other speakers offering? Sean.
Good morning. Sean Ryan, Dunnabate branch, the Labour Party, and former TD, and as somebody who has been a member of this fantastic party of ours for nearly 56 years, and been a TD. And as someone who has been a TD and a senator, well, for 6 months and a senator for 18 years, I have always been in favour of democracy of the party and working towards that. But in all fairness to this particular motion, there will be severe difficulties if this is passed in the context of the way it's been proposed at the moment. We have to have a person who is elected by the people as a leader of our party. And Dáil Éireann is the place for that to be expressed. And I can assure you that, in fact, if it is left to if somebody of high quality in the Senate, we will not get that opportunity to express it on a morning basis. There's another point that I want to bring to your attention. A lot of discussions and negotiations will take place after a general election. But after a general election, we don't have new senators for about 2 months after the election. So who is basically going to represent the party in those type of negotiations? In all fairness to those who are proposing this, and I would suggest to you, keep on your efforts to try and get more democracy in the party. But on this particular issue, it would not be in the interest of all of us as a party and for the people who we represent in the constituency if this was passed this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean. Now, are there any other speakers offering on motion 78? Yes, Del. 3. 3, is that it? 3? 4. 4. I'll take those 4 and no more.
Gramila Mahaguz, Carla, Simon Pindell, Kinsale and UC branch. Whether or not we pitch this motion as the dying breaths of a struggling party is down to us, I think. For too long we have been talking ourselves down. For too long we have let commentators in the media cast us as a party in crisis, even though we're not. We do face difficulties, but we aren't a party in crisis. We need to take back the debate. We need to give our representatives the opportunity to shape the debate. We need to give the space for the best and brightest of our representatives to lead the party. We need to give our members the opportunity to choose from the best and from the widest range of representatives in our parliamentary party. What I pitch it as is we need to show the people of Ireland that there is more democracy and opportunity in the Labour Party now than there is in Leo Varadkar's so-called Republic of Opportunity. I therefore commend the motion. Vote for it, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Now, there were two other speakers.
Gerard Organ, Mulligan branch, Dublin Bay North. I think this is a good motion. I think what we saw yesterday at the conference was democracy in action, when rather than having delegates coming to a conference, we opened it up to everybody. And I think that made a big difference to the conference yesterday as well. Also in the elections of officers yesterday, there was no... There was very few, before, if you sent your delegates, you told your delegates who to vote for. Yesterday it was open to people, and the candidates were around and people spoke to them. So it was a more use of democracy within the party, and I think the party is stronger for that. This motion, I think, is a good one. We need, as a party, to democratise the party more, and there's some other very good motions here as well in this whole area. We shouldn't fear the future. Many parties, both in Ireland and across Europe, don't have their party leader as a member of their parliament. We're a small parliament. We are a small country where everybody knows everybody else anyway, or somebody belonged to them. Right? We must have faith in ourselves as members of a party as well. There's nobody going to vote for a senator just because he's not a TD. If there's a person of that calibre in the party, that person will have to go through the whole leadership race anyway. So this may not be used in the next 10 or 20 years. It may be very necessary in the next 10 or 20 years. It is not an admission of defeat. Is it admission of a party who is strengthening itself and a party who is also democratising itself and making itself more open, A, to its members, and B, to scrutiny by the general populace. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Jack, you want to speak?
Jack Merriman, Holt Sutton branch. Delegates, I do oppose this amendment today. I don't think that it would, like my comrade Mick said, I don't think that it would be in the best interest of the party. I think that it will be potentially damaging in the media, because even though the comparison was made that Sinn Féin have had leaders in the Dáil, they've moved towards having their party president in the Dáil recently. The only recent comparison to this is when the PDs allowed their leader to come from the Seanad, and it didn't work out too well for them anyway. So I think that the context of extra parliamentary leaders in other countries is different, because in other countries you don't have to be a TD to be a minister. Even the Prime Minister of Spain isn't an MP in their parliament. So I think that it's wholly necessary in Ireland that our leader comes from the Dáil, and I would very much urge you to vote against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And the final speaker on this motion is John.
Good morning, delegates. Just like previous colleagues, I would also like to oppose this motion. I want to acknowledge the motion is well-intentioned, and I realise it is an attempt to expand party democracy, which is very important. I mean, Labour is a democratic party, has a long tradition of party democracy, particularly compared to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and we should maintain and enhance that. It's also worth saying that we've been very fortunate in the calibre and quality of the senators that we've had, both previously and the senators we have today. But I just make 2 quick points. I don't want our senators to remain senators forever. I want them to become TDs. I want them to be members of the Dáil. I want them to play the fullest possible part in the life of the party and indeed in the running and the governance of the country. Unfortunately, I think this motion sends the wrong message. I'm not sure the motion would have come forward if we had more than 7 TDs, and obviously we don't plan to have 7 TDs forever. I'm sure everyone here plans that we'll move back into double figures and further than that in terms of the number of TDs we have. So I think it's important not to send the message that Labour is a peripheral party, that we're unable or somehow unwilling to find a leader from the ranks of our TDs. And it's also important at this time, which is a crucial time in the history of the party, not to send out a message of weakness. And I fully understand that's not the intention of the proposers, but unfortunately I think that's what the motion would do. Finally, it was mentioned that we have spokespersons who are senators. We do, and they're excellent. We also have spokespersons who are councillors. And as I understand it, we also have spokespersons currently who are ordinary members of the party, which is very positive. But that isn't an argument for this motion. So I would urge you, while acknowledging that it's well-intentioned, I'd urge you to reject the motion on this occasion. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, John. And now we're going to proceed to take motion 80, 81, 82, 83, 84 and 85. And we will vote then on all of these motions at the end of the debate on those motions. So, Joanna,
okay.
Motion number 80.
Joanna Tuffy, member of the Lucan and Palmerstown branch, Dublin Midwest. This motion, it's one of 2 motions, because the Trinity branch motion is a similar motion. It's about what happens to motions after they're passed at conference. And why did the Lucan branch put this motion? We put it because at the last conference, our motion was passed that basically Labour would not go into government unless the measurable reduction of income inequality was an objective of that government, that it was agreed as an objective of that government. And the thing about that was, like, that motion was passed, it was fundamental. You know, it was what's called a red line, in quotation marks, because I'm not so sure about this word red line, like as if you can list off red lines. Labour has to be about fundamental things. And, you know, the things that should determine whether or not we go into government or not, they should be something that absolutely distinguishes us and sets us apart from everybody else, including other so-called left parties. You know, being in favour of sláinte care is not it. Sláinte care is not a fundamental issue. Every party is for it. What might be something that would be a red line for the Labour Party in relation to health is to abolish private health care, or in education to ban the charging of fees by schools. So, like, that's where we need to really get into things. And I suppose what I would say about red lines is, because it's in another motion as well, like, who decides red lines for the party? And I would say it's the members in party conference. That's where our fundamentals should be decided. That's where it should be decided what would determine whether or not we go into government or not. And not the position we had, for example, at the last delegate conference to go into government. And as everybody knows, I voted against going into government. And the reason I did was we were handed a document. We had a very short time frame to decide it. Things were revealed on the day. And it just wasn't strong enough. I didn't think we'd be hammered as much as we were, but I knew we would get hammered at the next election. And for us to go into government, it needed to be really worth it. We needed to do something that nobody else would do, and that it would be basically impossible for other parties to do. It would be that radical, you know. And I think we did a lot of good work in the last government. We didn't do something that would really set us apart. Like, for example, Labour in 1945 in Britain, when they established the NHS that still stands to this day. So the reason we're putting this motion is, when we pass motions at conference, that is our policy, and it should be followed up. Our motion last year has been basically ignored. I've never heard it mentioned by the party leader. It's something fundamentally
Joanna,
socialist,
you're nearly a minute
and
over time.
that's why we're putting this. Thank you.
Again, delegates, can I emphasise, I'm quite prepared to stay here until midnight. But if you're going to speak for 1/3 more of the time than is available, you're depriving somebody else of that time. So is there a seconder for motion number 80? Formally seconded. And now motion 81 in the name of Trinity Branch. Formally moved. Thank you, delegate. Is it formally seconded? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegate. Motion number 82 in the name of Donegal Constituency Council. Seamus.
Seamus Rogers, Donegal Constituency Council. Now, I'm not advocating divide between urban and rural areas, or, it's not my intention, because we're all committed Labour Party members. But again, the same as my neighbouring constituency of Sligo Leitrim, they have a similar motion, and for we're lost, we feel that we might as well be in outer Siberia at the moment, and that the Labour Party doesn't seem to be on the ground in rural areas. We try our best, we gather members and all to that, but again, just the responses in a lot of areas, I will sure they're only covering urban areas. And I know for a fact that small towns and villages need a rural hinterland in order to stay alive, and that's not happening at the moment. I canvassed recently for Michael D. Higgins, our president, glad to have him elected there, and we're getting that message all right. And I know from the, I suppose, words from a famous poet, Ní eicim fu mulahan na geon na aller it's now coscuan. It means, and the fact that I just take an example from my neighbouring GA club, the club of the Donegal County GA manager, where the players are scattered all over the world. They're not able to field on the rage teams at the moment. And I think this is a slide. Again, I would stress that fisheries and agriculture and all of this must be to the forefront in addressing the rural areas. Seamus. And in all fairness, the former TD, Mary Upton, a number of years ago, she did present a paper there on rural development.
Seamus,
we need to address this again now and ensure that rural areas are alive and well. Again, broadband mentioned there. Surely we can do better than that with the message that went on there. 70 years ago, without, I suppose, modern machinery or anything, the ESB said, let us have light. And in all fairness, this is one of the best semi-state companies ever founded, that body ensured that lights and power went into every home and offshore island.
Seamus, your time is up.
And
Seamus, please. Seamus, your time is up. Please. Seamus, your time is up. Your time is up. Can you cut off the mic, please? Cut off the mic. Seamus, your time is up. Okay. Thanks, Seamus. Thanks, Seamus. Next speaker. Is there a seconder for motion number 82? Formally seconded. Thank you, Seamus. Motion number 83 in the name of the Sligo branch from Sligo Leitrim constituency.
Hi, my name is Nessa Cosgrove. I'm from the Sligo-Leitrim constituency. I'm just following on from what Seamus said. I suppose the motion that I have raised is the perception that this is a Dublin Labour Party rather than an All-Ireland Labour Party. But it's my first time at conference, and I can very happily say I'm after all the inspirational speeches we heard last night and meeting such people that are very willing to offer support. We're delighted to say that hopefully this perception will be taken away. But I think the Labour Party is really losing out on a lot of voters in Sligo and Leitrim. There's something amazing happening in Sligo and Leitrim at the moment. There's a huge amount of people that are very proud to have repealed the Eighth, huge support for marriage equality, and there's a lot of socially conscious and progressive people that are not being represented. We're fed up with I suppose, the elected representatives we have at the moment. They're conservative, they're entitled politicians that we just don't want to vote for anymore. But I think we need help. We need help from Dublin, and we need help that we can push this through. I'm running myself in the next council and county council election, and I'm hoping that. But I was delighted to meet a lot of people last night to say that they're very willing to come down and offer support because we need your help badly. So, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. With 10 seconds to spare, by the way. Is there a seconder for motion number 83? Formally seconded. Thank you, Delegate. Now, before I move... Sorry, Jerry. Go ahead, Jerry. Motion number 84 in the name of Finglas Branch. Jerry Kerr.
There. Thanks very much. Thank you, Delks. I'll try and beat the 10-second record there, Jack. You haven't started the clock yet, have you? No. Yeah. Finglas, Sinn Féin, Vision of Remembrance, Liam Mellows, gun-toting, fully dressed, volunteer, statue being erected now. What is our vision of freedom? I'm asking you, delegates, please, can we get together on this one? The vision I'm putting forward to you is a new concept of freedom. The Garden of Remembrance in Dublin, as you know, commemorates all James Connolly, back to 1798, all those who fought for our freedom. But what has happened in the last 100 years? And we are at a unique time now to remember it in a different way and celebrate it. Mothers in mother and babies' homes were discriminated against dreadfully. We had Magdalen laundries. We had industrial and reformatory schools at a huge level, only comparable with Russia. We've had, sorry, I'm just losing, we've LGBT people in their own community discriminated against. All these were left behind. So I'm asking within Dublin City Council that there's a garden of remembrance, call it of freedom, of those not left behind, of those lest we forget or deny, and somehow or other throughout the whole country, we as Labour members, in whatever way possible, bring this new concept of freedom, that we are leaving no one behind and we are celebrating our new republic. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Is there a seconder for motion number 84? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. And now motion number 85. Motion number 85 in the name of the Drumcondra Glasnevin branch in Dublin Central. Joe. Thank you, Joe. Formally moved. Is it formally seconded? Formally seconded, I think. Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Now, before I move to the debate on motions 80, 81, 82, 83, 84 and 85, I notice that the Fraternal delegate from the UK Labour Party, Stephen Pound MP, has been in the room all morning, long before most of us, and he was here yesterday too. And would you extend, please, a very warm welcome to Comrade Stephen Pound. Stephen, the fraternal delegate from the UK Labour Party is always very, very welcome at our conference, and you in particular, Stephen, are very, very welcome indeed. And I hope you would convey our good wishes to Jeremy Corbyn and all those who are fighting for the UK working class and for the values of social solidarity across the world.
Consider it done.
So now, motions number 80, 81, 82, 83, 84 and 85 are before the floor for debate. Are there any speakers offering? 2. Jack, do you want to go first? 3. Jack? John. Ger, sorry, Ger, my apologies.
Ger Dorgan, Dublin Bay North, Mick Mulligan branch. I want to speak to 80 and also to 81 because they're similar motions. And again, what they have to do is democracy in action and information flow going from the top to the bottom and the other way as well. It's very important that conference decisions are taken seriously, and that if people, there's not a motion, but people want information to come back to them as to what has been done to the motions. Conference is the main area for the decision makers of this party. And I think Joanne, when she was putting that motion, was very articulate in that. Like most of us, I was in the room in 2011, and we were given this huge document, and basically there was a lock-in for a few hours. Now, I think that if we make decisions at this conference, we need to know what's happened to them. If they're referred back, it's like getting the third secret of Fatima to get answers to some of the questions. Everybody knows the third secret of Fatima, so I won't elucidate on that. But it's very important that people just don't get two or 3 minutes and we say, yeah, grand, we got that passed. What happened to it? It was important enough to be on the floor of a national conference. It's important enough that the feedback should come to the members and should come to the branches. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. John?
John Walsh, Clonsilla, Dublin West. I'd also like to support motions 80 and motion 81 by Trinity Branch. I suppose just briefly say, this is about internal party democracy, and it's about ensuring proper communication with members. As a party, we have often struggled with internal communication, and I won't put it more strongly than that. And that was particularly the case at times while we were in government. So it's extremely important that when policy motions are passed by conference, there's a clear line of accountability, and that they're looked at by the Central Council, and it's clear that they've been acted on, or if they haven't been acted on, that a valid reason is offered. And I suppose policy formation ultimately in the Labour Party should rest with the membership. So in terms of talking about red lines or policies that might be considered as conditions for entering government, those should be driven by the membership. And I would urge delegates not to be misled or placed in a position where the party is committed to supporting stable administrations based on red lines which are not even stated. It can't be a minimum red line if it's not even put in writing. I think we'd be very foolish as a party to get into talking about red lines or offering government stability. It's not our role or our job as the Labour Party to offer government stability after the next election. It's our role to transform society. And we should rebuild. We should prioritise rebuilding our strength as a party until we're in a position to transform society, and we shouldn't be in a position where we're a mudguard to a major Conservative party. So I thank the Chair for his indulgence in allowing me to speak in a motion that's already been debated. I'd urge you to vote for 80 and 81 and reject 79. Thank you very much.
It was too late to stop you, John. Andrew?
Good morning, comrades. Andrew O'Brien, Clondalkin, Rathcoole and Dublin Midwest. So it's lovely to see you all again here. Just in the spirit of the hand of friendship that we reached out with last night, but that Brendan reached out last night to the Social Democrats and the Green Party, I'd like to give a special mention to Councillor Gary Gannon on his achievement of preventing the sale of the Sean McDermott Street laundries. And I want to use this opportunity to speak in favour of motion 84, that I know our colleagues on Dublin City Council, that they have worked very hard with their Green and Social Democrat and Progressive colleagues in order to prevent that sale. And I would like to see that as a site of the remembrance of what has happened to the marginalised groups in Irish society across those years. And I would ask you to please support motion 84. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you, Andrew. Willie?
Thanks, Chair. Willie Hamilton, Newbridge Branch, the Labour Party. I'm here to support motion 80 and 81. I think this is fundamental to democracy and everything that the Labour Party is about. And if we're serious about democracy, we have to be serious in respect of how our policies are formulated and how they find their way into a manifesto. I don't believe that motion 79 is in contradiction of these two. I think it's actually part and parcel and essential to it. Yesterday I was electing a national executive, and when I was marking my ballot paper in that national executive election, I was very mindful that the people I was putting forward were the people that were going to challenge this whole concept of other people deciding their policies and other people deciding their manifesto. In our constitution, this is the decision-making body of this party, and we should insist, and our national executive from their first meeting should insist, that the policies that are adopted in this conference are the policies that are our red line issues and are going to find themselves into the manifesto, and we should be briefed on a regular basis as to how those policies are finding themselves in our manifesto. And our manifesto is ready to go long before an election. So we all know what the red line issues are. We all know what our manifesto is going to be, and that's what we should be campaigning on. I ask people to support these two motions.
Thank you, Willie. Do you want to speak, Delegate? Yes, please. One last speaker, and then I'll call on the Chair of Standing Orders to move that we extend conference to midnight.
Thanks, Jack. Liam van der Speck, Labour Cavan. I just want to make a quick point on motion 83. I think it's a good point. Other speakers have spoken about how the Labour Party shouldn't be just, a bulwark for the right-wing parties and voting fodder. Well, if we aspire to be more than that, we have to be a party that doesn't just cater to urban areas. We have to be a party for the whole of Ireland. If we look at constituencies like mine and Cavan, we have no seats, none on any council, none of it all. That should be taken seriously as a problem by the party, and I think ask why that is the case. Because left-wing issues like education and work and childcare and health, those all completely apply to rural Ireland just as much as they apply to urban Ireland. And we have to ask ourselves why these chancellors like the Healy Rays are being heard and not us, because when we don't step in there, those people do. And I had a few other points now, hold on. But if we look at Ireland, rural Ireland, we have a lack of foreign direct investment. I'm a computer science graduate. I'm trying to find work in Cavan. It's probably not going to happen. I'm probably have to go to work partly in Dublin because there's just almost nothing there. And it all goes to Dublin. You ask Pascal Donoghue why that's the case. I say, oh, well, they don't have the infrastructure out there. Well, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. If you don't build it, then yeah, they're not going to come. And they're not going to come because you're not building it. So we don't have a train. A motorway doesn't even come half the way. So that's why people feel left behind. And that's as much to blame for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. But we have to make that argument and show that we're going to do better for them. So I urge you to support that. And we're going to be a bigger party, and we have to cater for everybody there. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, delegates, we're going to move to the vote on all of these motions. and I'm going to take the vote in the order in which we took the motions. So, in other words, I'm going to take the vote on motion number 77, then on motion... Sorry? Yes, yeah, I do, but I do. Thank you, Dermot. No, just the amendment to take. Sorry, you're correct, Dermot. I take your point of order. I should have invited the General Secretary to respond to the debate on party affair.
Nearly got away with it, Dermot. Thank you for that. Much appreciated.
My apologies. My apologies, Brian. Go ahead, Brian. Don't use too much time.
I won't use much time. I do appreciate that, Dermot. Thank you on Sunday morning to get me up and talking. I'm not going to talk for long. I won't use the full 2 minutes. I think what's been said from last night and today is about internal party democracy. So the votes that happen here are what actually decides what policy is. So certainly on 77, 78 and 79, they're for you to decide, rather than from the platform or from guidance to come from head office or from the party leader or anybody else for you to tell you what way to vote. So this morning you will decide on those votes. On the rest of them, I absolutely acknowledge that there are issues in relation to the party and the resources that we have on how we can help rural constituencies, and I acknowledge more work needs to be done. I accept actually what's put in there, and we will do our best on all of them. And from 80, sorry, it is Sunday morning, if you bear with me for a second, from 80 to 85, I would be absolutely supportive on them all. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And now we're going to take the vote on the motions in the order in which we took the motions. So we're going to deal with motion 77 and deal with motion 79 and then move on to motion 78 and the others. So we may require tellers, I don't know. All of them. So the first motion we're going to deal with is motion number 77. There is an amendment to that motion in the name of the Jim Kemmy UCC branch in Cork South Central. I'm going to put the amendment to the floor first. All in favour of the amendment, please show. All against? I declare the amendment carried. And now the motion including the amendment which provided for the deletion of the words "and extreme left." All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried. And now motion number 79, which also is accompanied by an amendment in the name of the Clondalkin Rathcoole branch in Dublin Mid-West. I'm going to put the amendment first. All in favour of the amendment, please show. All against the amendment? I declare the amendment lost. And now motion number 79 without the amendment. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion lost. And now we move to motion number 78, which envisages changing the party constitution to extend the franchise for leadership candidates to senators. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion lost. Now, motion number 80. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried. Motion number 81. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried. Motion number 82. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried. Motion number 83. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried. Motion number 84. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried. On motion number 85, all in favour, please show. All against? Carried overwhelmingly, and I declare the motion carried. So now, I want, if you're ready to announce the result of the election, I want to invite the General Secretary to outline the result of the elections. Brian McDowell.
Thanks, Chairperson. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody that put their name forward, number one, put their name on the ballot paper. It takes a lot to do that and to canvass and look for colleagues' support. So thank you for everybody that actually put their name forward. But just to announce 3 results, one for the Executive Board, the Panel of Men, one for the Policy Research Unit and one for the International Affairs Unit. So on the Executive Board, the Panel of Men, where we chose 4 people, you chose 4 people onto the panel. We had Luke Carroll, Paddy Cole, Tom Cosgrave and Adrian Kane were elected. For the Policy Research Unit, Patrick Ahern, Lorraine Mulligan and Eamon Tuffy were elected. And the International Affairs Unit, Rhonda Donaghy, David Kitching and Jack Merriman. Congratulations to everybody.
Thank you, Brian. I want to congratulate those who were successful and commiserate with those who were unsuccessful. But given the way things tend to play out in some of these bodies, they might have been the real winners. So we're going to proceed now to deal with rural and community development and culture, heritage and the Gaeltacht. And if we could have, please, the mover of motion number 86 in the name of Templemore Branch in Tipperary. Is there anybody here from Templemore Branch? Nobody here. Motion number 87 in the name of Kells Branch in Meath. Formally moved. Thank you, Delegate. Is there a seconder? Formally seconded. Thank you, Delegate. On motion number 88 in the name of Ennis Branch in Clare. Formally moved. Thank you, Michael. Is there a seconder? Is it formally seconded? Thank you, Delegate. So we now have motions number 87 and 88 before the floor. If the delegate or a delegate from Templemore Branch in Tipperary can be found very quickly, I'll still take motion number 86. Are there any speakers for motion 87 and 88? Any speakers offering? Aidan, are you responding to these motions? Sorry, Senator Kevin Humphreys to respond to motions number 87 and 88.
Apologies from Willie Penrose, he couldn't make it here this morning. I have a tall order to fill Willie's shoes. Look, I absolutely fully support the motions that are in front of conference, but there's something that the Labour Party needs to remember, that during their term in government, it was the Labour Party that ensured that the post offices remained open in rural Ireland. Without Joan ensuring that the contracts for the protection of social services went to the post offices, they would have been closed. And we listened to the likes of Dennis Nocton and others bemoaning that there was no plan, that Labour was closing hundreds of post offices across the country, which is entirely false, quite the opposite. The post office system remained open because the Labour Party was in government. Otherwise, we would have seen a far more diminished service right across our country. I just mentioned briefly, I think motion 88 is a motion that should get some real consideration, that we need to move services closer to the people that we need them. We need to watch how our rural villages and towns and the services they get. The idea of moving people far into a main town, into a nursing home, when services can be provided locally. And that's an important element and an important motion. And I think it's something that we should take on into our manifesto for the upcoming general election. So, delegates, thank you very much for your motions.
Excuse me. Now we're going to vote. Is there anybody from the Templemore branch in Tipperary? No. So motion number 86 falls. So motion number 87. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare motion number 87 carried. Motion number 88. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare motion number 88 carried. And now we're going to proceed to deal with culture, heritage and the Gaeltacht. And we're going to take motions 89 and 90. Is there a mover for motion 89 on behalf of Dublin South Central Constituency Council? Thank you,
Dan. Good morning, delegates. Michael Kinsley, Dublin South Central Constituency Council. This motion is about the national parks and the potential extension of the national parks. As many of you will be aware, the Wicklow Mountains National Park is a place of extraordinary natural beauty and a place of great amenity both to the area around Wicklow and also to people from Dublin City and further afield who use it for sporting reasons, for cultural reasons, and it has a very high ecological value. As you may be aware, in the recent past, the estate in Lugalaw, which contains within it about 4,000 acres, effectively in the middle of the national park, has become available for sale. And the estate at the moment and the land surrounding it consists of 4,000 acres of upland area of very significant ecological value. There is currently permissive access to that land, which is widely used by walkers, climbers, people appreciative of nature and the value of that particular area. If that estate and the lands around it falls into private hands, the risk is that that permissive access will end and that that land will be lost to the national park and to the state. The motion calls for and effectively supports a position taken by Mountaineering Ireland and indeed by the National Parks and Wildlife Service, which is the body charged with managing the national parks, that calls on the government to purchase the lands around the estate, not necessarily the house, the very famous stately home on the estate, but the lands around it. And by doing that, the state would ensure that access remains to that particular portion of land, but also the state would be gaining for itself an area of outstanding natural beauty, of great amenity value in terms of cultural value, sporting value, and a great tourist attraction, in fact. If anybody wants any indication that the permissive access may no longer exist if the estate falls into private hands, you need only go up there today and see the no trespasser signs that have gone up in the recent past. There is precedent for this. In 2016, the state acquired 4,000 acres, 4,900 acres, in fact, of land adjoining the Wicklow Mountains National Park in order to extend the park. They did that for the sum of €800,000, which is not a small amount of money, but considering the asset the state would be obtaining, it would be, if it's an indicator of price, it would be something that the state could certainly do from its resources. I suggest, delegates, that there is a wider debate to be had in this country about access to private land. I think the Labour Party should be the party that it stands up very strongly for the interests of the wider society as opposed to landowners. We talked about this yesterday in terms of the constitutional right to private property, and indeed I think it has implications for rural development. But I'd say this finally, the value of this particular section of land exceeds that of access only, please. And I'd finish only by saying I'd ask you to support the motion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I allowed a bit of latitude there because it's an issue that's close to my heart in Wicklow. So, Sean, are you moving motion number 90? Now, have we a seconder, first of all, for motion number 89? It's formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Sean, motion number 90.
Chahirig Shaunell Harvey, Dáil Counter Carla Kilcunnig. Sean Céadúr le tamil go bhfuil rún ingéilge an glár agus gan buchas the standing orders as what leis, and I thank all of you for your fortitude in actually reading through the whole motion. So it speaks for itself largely. Tá deiscéal an ó thaobh na Gaelne, and if I can be permitted, Chair, just to mention one specific person, the Jimmy Rogers, who's in Shaw Armaghan, and we owe Jimmy a huge debt of gratitude as a Gaeltacht activist, as an Irish language speaker, and the carrier of the flag I gunta dúnagáil le glúnta an ús agus maithú Jimmy. But I would have to say it's even more heartening, and I know it will be heartening for Jimmy, that I could speak Irish until the small hours this morning. Le anach dina óga nua atá takeisteach I bartaí an Lochdibre agus Gwylan Gaelan ar a cholacha agus churan fáilte bhór roimh. In terms of this motion, it's blian na Gaeilge. There's a huge positive story for the Irish language. In the last 5 census, the numbers of Irish language speakers outside and inside the Gaeltacht has risen, with the exception of a statistical reduction in the Gaeltacht in the last census. Tá sé anhaachta go leanna mídaraig ag taú leis an danga in Achlí gur féidirlinn. And I'll make a couple of points in relation to our party that aren't in the motion. If it's good enough for the President of Ireland to have 50% of his posters as Gaeilge agus as Béarla Lilin and Actus, it should be good enough for his party that he led for 40 years. Bíimiist in our party dá hangach agus tosnómid an seo mar a dúirt mé an bhliain Chicago. All of our signage, all of the major promotion of our annual conference should be absolutely bilingual, the bhil and 40 agus tá sé nám go raibh sé déanta. Comala sin tá sé anhaachtaach go leanna mídaraig go churann an tanga chun cín in Achlí gur féidirlinn. We need to stand with Gaeltacht communities in strengthening their everyday living, including the post offices as was previously described. Tací míad leis an danga, tací míad leis an Gaeltacht. Bíimiist brodúil mar 40 politúil dá hangach. Let's remember, the language north or south doesn't belong to any individual political party. Let Labour stand full shoulder for the rights of Irish speakers north and south.
Thank you, Chair. Now, is there a seconder for the motion? Formally seconded. Formally seconded. Do you wish to speak, delegate? Are you seconding the motion? Yeah, okay.
Good morning, comrades. Max Kelly, Galway West. I'd like to second this motion, and I'd like to draw your attention to the second last paragraph. I noticed this yesterday. The Irish language in the north is being politicised. The Good Friday Agreement and the St Andrews Agreement, the Irish language was set out that the government had to legislate on the Irish language. It has been politicised in the north. It always has been. I believe it's still illegal to speak Irish in a court in Northern Ireland. There are certain political elements in the north which are trying to unpick the Good Friday Agreement for various different reasons, Brexit being the obvious kind of motor of that at the moment. I think it's really important for the Labour Party to send this signal that all elements of the peace process in the north should be supported, and I think it behoves the Labour Party to put pressure on the Irish government to guarantee the agreements that were made These are agreements between the British and Irish governments, and I think the Labour Party should put pressure, because I feel at the moment the current government is taking its eye off matters in the north, and we should be putting pressure on them. I'd like to commend this motion to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Now, are there any speakers offering on these motions? Seamus? Now, it's 2 minutes, Seamus, whether it's Irish or English.
Agitira Bawelum Takula Shannon Chan August Nadini Yella, Majerla Changilake, August Madurcha, Shennig and Northern, August Tasha Fetcha Fucha, and Shaw, August Boyarta, Way, La Changi, August Culture, August Lehichan, August Arash, Tamahin, Morgana, the Rupunchan, Tagobor, and Ishla Plan Fiji Plian, the Gaeltacht. Agus tasam goal ober war jante so Gaeltacht agus the midden Gaeltacht scolan agus hechan a kahimuj holorain shan na an changi boss agus tasha nacha a labin wash kahimuj jiru or show agus chagi when at bio near bunch party be na eglisha be Lecha Changi is a much na herna, and I would like to support this motion. I think we can, cross the divide. Just to give an example, last year at the Padre O'Donnell weekend in Arranmore Island, we had Linda Irvine from East Belfast down, who is, in fact, spreading the Irish language in that area. So, for there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you, Shane. Jerry.
Jerry Kerr, Dublin North West. I'm opposing this motion, comrades, and I might only get the same number of votes I got for the means testing a child benefit, but I still have to oppose
Jerry,
it.
which motion are you opposing now?
I'm opposing the is it number 90 there?
Yes, okay, go ahead, yes.
Now, the reason I'm opposing is because since I went blind, I've visited all schools, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, private, public, single-sex, and I'm absolutely convinced that the way forward for us is, as John Hume says, that the school is the melting pot of society, and within that unity you have diversity. So the rights of Irish language speakers should be within the state school, not going off into a separate type of structure. So I firmly believe, I've come across it where it saddened me, in one particular religious school where the young girls wouldn't ask questions. So I think there's probably unintended consequences with the whole Gael School movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Now, as there are no further speakers, I want to invite Deputy Joan Borton to respond to motion number 89, and then I will ask Senator Aidan O'Riordan to respond to motion number 90. Deputy Joan Borton.
Thank you, Chair, and can I thank the mover of the motion. I think there's nothing like a fresh blast of Wicklow mountain air on a Sunday morning after a Saturday night, like a lot of the delegates appear to have had. So can I actually invite the Chairman of the Labour Party, given his very important statement there of support for the public acquisition of our heritage at Lugalaw and in the Wicklow Mountains. Can I invite him and perhaps people who are here that in a couple of Sundays we meet outside the entrance to the area, and we actually have a Labour demonstration to say that Lugalaw belongs to the people of Ireland. Now, I know Jack in the past has climbed many mountains, but we only want him to climb 2 more. One is obviously when he joins us in Lugalore, and the second obviously is winning the seat back in Wicklow. And I believe the first Jack will contribute significantly to the second. Can I just say, Lugalore is not only famous as an area of outstanding beauty used by hikers and walkers for generations, and Gareth de Bruyne, who lived in Lugalore, was very, very generous with access to the estate. It's now owned by a trust from the Channel Islands. I think it is really important that the government goes into negotiation with the trustees of the Guinness Family Trusts. Guinnesses have been good to Ireland. Guinness is good for you, as their slogan used to say, but Ireland has been good to Guinness. And this is our heritage, and we should not allow, people who are international bankers have such a vital part of Irish heritage in their ownership. It's also the place where much Irish music development took place, and people from Liam O'Flynn to Seamus Heaney worked there, wrote there and performed there, as well as people like the Rolling Stones, and lots of films were made there. So in terms of Wicklow's heritage, it's specifically important in terms of what it has committed to Irish culture. It would be a fitting memorial to Gareth Brown, in which the Irish government and the Guinness family could cooperate to create a beautiful extension of the Wicklow National Park. Thank you, delegates.
Thank you, Joan. Hey, Don.
Grimima Jack agus just bhil an taú go hilas go thomna na méid aráteach Sean mar de sé hain bhhaní sé goide go leir ag lena go héin ar maidin ná ag lena go héine gar maidin ach é sin ráte bhil an taú prísibug leis méid bhí ráte ag Jerry Comá mar sé marm sé hain gur is le gacha an fáiste de tíir seo an gcuig an íháin dó siú itá freistar gcuilscin agus cordon a bheith seaasta le gacha an fáiste de tíir seo. Ná dénig go dearmid gur muide an drám a bhunig telefísin na Gaeilge, agus tá agad recordún seasta le muintin na Gaeltachta agus tó siúd a leabhar an Gaeilge ar fud na tíre. I would suggest, while backing this motion, I think Jerry makes a point that I think deserves more expansion, if you like. I believe that Irish language is for every child. It doesn't necessarily just belong to those who attend Gaelscoilna. I think we should move towards a situation where one a year in every primary school is taught exclusively through Irish, so that every child who leaves primary school has fluency in the language. Because I think if we're honest about the Irish language, it has been one of the biggest educational policy failures in Ireland. And if we were to give that gift to every child, no matter what primary school they were to attend, a full year completely through Irish, be it 4th class or 3rd class, I think we'd be giving them a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gift. But while mar derm taca leis an rún a tá cathair síos.
Thank you. Now we're going to move to the vote on motions number 89 and 90. All in favour of motion number 89, please show. All against. I declare motion number 89 carried. And motion number 90, all in favour, please show. All against. I declare motion number 90 carried. And now we have to proceed to deal with a number of emergency motions. First of all, we have motion number 87, which should have been taken along with rural and community development in the name of the Kells branch from Meath East. Sorry, yes. Sorry, we'll take them later. We're going to have to deal with a number of motions before we conclude. We're going to have to deal with the motions around the panel discussion on Brexit, motion number 91. and motions number 92 to 96 in relation to workers' rights and related matters. And before we adjourn for a minute or two to set up for the panel discussion on Brexit, we're going to have to try to deal with the emergency motions. And what I propose to do is to take them after the panel discussions, unless someone objects now. If someone objects now, we'll take them now. Can you formally move it? You certainly can, Ian. If you want to formally move anything, you can formally move it. But I better read it out. You're formally moving the motion. I'll allow you to formally move it, Ian. It's formally seconded by John. And in case of any doubt, what the motion says is that Labour conference notes this week that Paul Makonda, Regional Commissioner for Tanzania's main city of Dar es Salaam, has announced the creation of a surveillance squad dedicated to hunting down gay people. Conference condemns this as a barbaric abuse of human rights. Conference notes Ireland's leading role in LGBT rights in recent years. Conference believes Ireland has a role in promoting LGBTQI human rights internationally. In the light of the Tanzanian situation, Conference calls for a human rights-based review of Irish aid provided in Tanzania. A review, a human rights-based review. The motion has been moved and seconded. Are there any speakers offering? There are no speakers offering, so I'm going to put it to the floor. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. John, you're putting a point of order or a point of information? Number 2, in the name of Dublin West Constituency Council. Yes, John, you can formally move it. It's formally moved. Is there a seconder for emergency motion number 2? Formally seconded. So unless there is an objection, I'm going to put it to the floor. I'll read it out. Conference rejects any proposal by the government to raise the cap on bankers' salaries in the bailed-out banks above the current cap of 500k per annum for each senior banker. We should have taken it yesterday. All in favour, please show. Bridget? Conference rejects any proposal by the government to raise the cap on bankers' salaries in the bailed-out banks above the current cap of 500k per annum for each senior banker. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. And now, before we move to, I just want to say, I want to make a short statement in relation to an incident which occurred yesterday, before we move to the panel discussion on Brexit. And this relates to what happened with Joe Costello, representing Dublin Central Constituency Council. I was hoping that Joe would be in the hall when I was making this statement, but I'm conscious that people will be drifting away. You will recall that I had appealed to speakers to observe the time limits, quite emphatically, because it was quite clear to me that the time was evaporating. Joe then stepped up to move a motion. I was observing the clock over there, which hasn't been working very well at all during this conference, and it has rendered it extremely difficult to chair the conference. And what the clock said was that Joe was nearly a full minute, i.e. 1/3 of the time beyond the time. And I rather abruptly, too abruptly, called him to order, because I knew that if I didn't call Joe to order, immediately after I had appealed for order, there wasn't very much point in me staying here, frankly. And Joe was quite rightly quite taken aback. And he stepped down from the podium at my request. And then I realised that the clock wasn't working right, and that Joe actually had about 1/3 or 1/4 of a minute left. And I invited him to step back up on at the podium to complete his remarks. Now, I was totally wrong in interjecting and stopping Joe from speaking. And I want it to be recorded here that whereas I cannot undo it, I recognise that it was totally inappropriate, particularly in relation to a comrade who has contributed so much over so many years, very often in the most difficult of circumstances, in the interests of this party and the values for which it stands. And I want, given that I cannot undo it, it to be recorded that I most profoundly apologise to Joe and to Emer and to the delegates from Dublin Central constituency and to Conference for that error. And I would appreciate it if the Secretariat, the General Secretary, would formally convey to Joe these remarks. Now, we're going to move now to the panel discussion on Brexit, and so, yes, I'll invite the General Secretary to explain.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to say a couple of words, if I can, as we change around the set. We have a number of motions, as the Chair said, left. The next motion we're going to take is motion 91. What we're going to do is have a Brexit. We're going to have a panel discussion with Q&A from the floor. So this won't be just people sitting at the top table chatting among themselves. We are looking for obviously interaction from the floor. So we're going to take motion 91 under the Brexit, and I'm going to ask Dominic Hannigan is going to chair. Steve Pound, MP, Clara Hannah from the SDLP, and Manuel Cortez, who is the General Secretary of TSSA, will be on the panel. So if people could just remain in the room, we're going to just change the set. It'll only take a couple of minutes. We're then going to move into another panel discussion on decent work for all, and we will take the motions from 92 to 96 within that panel. There are a number of people who will be taking part in that panel, as I'll introduce them when they come up later on. But I would ask delegates to remain in the room. This will only take a couple of minutes. Thank you.
to our panel discussion on Brexit. If people want to just, at the back of the hall, if you're staying, if you'd like to take a seat, so we can make sure we've just got the voices from up here, if that's okay. Just as, yeah, are we ready to go? Great, excellent. Thanks very much. We've got about 40 minutes this morning to discuss this very important topic. It's 100 years ago today that the war poet Wilf Owen lost his life as he was leading his men across a canal in northern France, just 1 week before the armistice of the war to end all wars. Out of that war and the Second World War came a commitment from across Europe to try to make sure that this never happened again. And what came out of that was the formation of the European Union. We in Ireland joined in the early 70s, and we were joined on the same day by the United Kingdom. Since then, here in Ireland, we've seen tremendous changes, economic growth, social improvements, and as a result of that, there's a good buy-in to our membership of the European Union. It contrasts somewhat with the situation in the United Kingdom, where for the last 40 years there's been an ongoing attack by the media on membership of the European Union, and that culminated in the result in the referendum 2.5 years ago, when the UK public decided to leave the EU. The result of that has got profound impacts on Ireland. The Labour Party did a study 2 years ago looking at how we would be impacted. We're going to be impacted in terms of our relationship with Northern Ireland, in terms of our relationship with the United Kingdom, in terms of workers' rights, and of course in terms of the economy and the economic development of our island. Today, I'm joined by 4 excellent speakers who are going to cover all of those points, after which we'll have a chance to have a discussion and to take some questions. My first speaker today is Stephen Pound, MP for Ealing North. When I looked at Stephen's background, because when you're the chair, you look for a few words to say about each of your panellists, and quite often it might be difficult to get a paragraph out of it. Well, Stephen, I could write a Netflix series on you, I think. A fascinating
Breaking
background.
Bad.
And I think one of the benefits of your lifetime experience is that you bring a certain perspective to the whole Brexit debate. Stephen is a shadow minister for Northern Ireland. Many of you will have seen his contribution on Channel 4 from the UK Labour Party conference in Liverpool, when it was clear that he's probably perhaps the only UK politician who gets the issue of the border. So I'm delighted that you've joined us here today, and I'm looking forward to your contribution.
Dominic, thank you very, very much indeed. I'm always slightly worried when somebody says they've been looking you up, because I always think special branch are involved in there somewhere. But can I just formally bring fraternal greetings from the British Labour Party? And I have to say, it's an absolute honour and a delight. I have to say, the welcome has been amazingly warm. I've heard so much good Irish being spoken, I thought I was actually back home in West London for a moment.
Glass.
I'm particularly grateful, although I have to say, that was slightly diminished when I heard Jack say that they're going to extend standing orders until midnight. I note that he didn't say on what day. But we are here. And it's extraordinary sensation. I have to say, people, I understand, there have been reverses for the Labour Party. But when I heard last night the speech from Brendan Howlin, was one of the most inspirational, vibrant, strong, and positive and imaginative speeches I've heard for many, many years. That showed me a party of strength. A party that not just has a wonderful past, and we in the British Labour Party have so much to learn from the work you've done, particularly in the field of industrial relations. We learn and admire the work that the Irish Labour Party have done. But what I heard last night was a real, genuine vision for the future, one that could fire people, and I think will fire people. And for me, that was an absolute honour to actually be present, to have heard that. And I think that if anyone is really saying that the Irish Labour Party has somehow passed its peak, the best days are yet to come. And it's an honour to see Joan in the front row there. This is not my first Labour Party conference. I normally sneak in silently at the back. But it's marvellous to see so many friends here. I'm here to talk particularly about Brexit, but I cannot help but comment on the fact that the relationship between our two Labour parties expresses that international solidarity, that socialism, that strength, that fraternity, which has been very, very much one of the cornerstones of the European Union. And it's that reaching across, and it's that, people talk about the economics of the European Union, people talk about backstops and borders, but there is a European dream, there is a vision of a better life, a better way of living. We've heard that this is the anniversary of the death of Wilfred Owen, who wrote that most bitter poem, Dulce est decorum est pro patria mori, and he refers in that to the Scarlet Majors sending glum heroes up the line to death. Working people have been the people who've died in the trenches. They are the people who have suffered. And we need a Labour Party to speak for working people with the strength that I've heard here this weekend. And that strength can best be expressed in solidarity on a national and an international scale, which is why, for me, the European Union is so absolutely, 3 minutes ago, they've all changed. So ask me again in 10 minutes. Nobody knows where we are at the moment. I hope we'll have some idea. There is much talk of backstops. I still find it very difficult to educate many of my colleagues in Westminster on what they continue to describe as the Irish border, when we all know that the Irish border is actually the beach. And what we're talking about is the British border in Ireland. But that's, whether we are in a customs union or not, I really don't know. The things seem to be very, very febrile at the present time. All I can say is that the Labour Party, your sister party, we will not support any agreement which reintroduces the insanity, the brutality of a hard border on the island of Ireland. We will not go there. What we will do is work together with our sister parties for the best possible deal that we can get that will protect the fundamental human rights, the civic rights of working people throughout Europe. And what I've heard this weekend gives me wind beneath my wings and inspires me even more. So we'll have Q&A in a moment, but for the moment, I reinforce the fraternal greetings I bring you, and also it's marvellous to have Clara Hannah from the SDLP here. I think we have joint fraternal greetings. Thank you all very much indeed for making me so welcome. And please, God, we can get through the insanity, this madness of this ghastly, bloodletting Brexit process and somehow return to what we all agree with, what we all want to see, and that is a solidarity, an international strength, a coming together for those simple, common, basic human rights expressed so well here today. I salute you for your work. I will work with you, and dear God, I hope we can triumph. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you. And before I forget, the chair, Jack O'Connor, asked me to just say that, Claire, he hadn't realised you were in the room when he spoke earlier, and he wanted to extend his fraternal greetings to you. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Lorraine Mulligan. We're all very familiar with Lorraine. She was the chair of the party for a number of years before our current chair, and she also flew the flag for us in the Dublin West by-election. I think it was 2015, was it? 2015? 14. And she did it very well. Lorraine works for SIFTU and will be speaking today about the impact of Brexit on our economy. So over to you, Lorraine.
Yeah, I suppose, thanks very much, Dominic. And following from what Stephen has just said, the fact is that the deal is as yet unknown, or there are so many unknowns. We don't know the shape of Brexit yet. But there are indications coming that it may be a soft Brexit. The most recent state of affairs is that it looks like a light customs union between the EU and the UK. But I suppose the real point in all of this is that any withdrawal deal is only, of course, the start of the analysis of the impacts. Because up until now we have been operating in speculation as to what Brexit will really mean. And once we tie down exactly what the withdrawal agreement looks like, we will then have the real job will effectively begin. I suppose the reason that people it has taken time to get to this is because there's almost been a denial that is this actually going to happen? Is this going to go ahead? We might not like Brexit. We might not like the prospect of it. We might like it to be reversed. But the fact of the matter is that in the Irish national interest, it is in the Irish national interest to have a deal. We have a very close trading relationship with the UK and, of course, with Northern Ireland. There obviously are questions are now remaining about whether this potential deal, light customs union, will stick in terms of the DUP and the hardline Brexiteers. It does beg the question as to, in some ways, what was it all about if the UK ends up being a rule taker. Now, for Ireland, there is a threat here, and you could call it cynical, but we do have to be alert that this might be a short-term way for the hardline Brexiteers to swallow, get this over the line, and in 5 years' time unravel further and have a harder line Brexit situation. And I suppose for us in the Labour Party, one of the big considerations is what does this mean for Europe itself, for our relationship with Europe? We've come through a very turbulent time with the bailouts, the financial crash, Greece, Ireland, you know, the pigs, all of that. Europe has, as a result of that, initiated a kind of an internal inspection of itself in the form of a debate on the future of Europe. And already there have been some measures taken to try and particularly look at the social dimension, which arguably has taken a back step. So we have had an initiative on the European Pillar of Social Rights, and that now, it was a lot of kind of nice flowery words, but there is a directive emerging from that process to give better rights to workers in the gig economy, atypical workers, and there's also a proposal for a European Labour Authority. So I suppose the idea that social Europe is not dead, but what does Brexit mean for the momentum to further deepen Europe, social Europe? Is it going to have a dampening effect? Because is Europe going to be too afraid to do anything that might spur other countries to go against this kind of bureaucracy, or what is perceived to be Europe creeping into daily life? I think in Ireland and on the left, for us in general, I mean, there are major issues in Europe, but Europe has been good for workers. It is, in global terms, projecting better standards on whether it is wages, global solidarity, peace. It has projected that across Europe, across the world. The question now is whether, as a result of Brexit, the momentum of Europe will be damaged. But the political energy of Brexit, in some ways, it's an argument for getting this just done. We mightn't like it, but at least it will allow us to concentrate on some of those big ticket items in terms of the future of Europe. I mean, you never hear in Ireland or in the UK, indeed, very much positive talk about Europe. There's a very negative debate out there. But as a left Labour Party, I think we need to make sure that we hold on to what is, and develop and use this as an opportunity to strengthen social Europe. And just, I would say as well, as I said, this is only the start of the analysis, because if we do get a withdrawal deal, then comes the real analysis, sector by sector, as to what are those impacts. I mean, we do have some notional figures about job losses on the basis of a hard Brexit.
It's an ongoing piece of work, isn't it?
Yeah, up to 50,000 jobs if it was a hard Brexit or no deal. But the real work will go into sector by sector, looking at how we can prepare, and that will really be important for the social partners, for trade unions and employers to negotiate our way through this, because unfortunately we might like it, but it is becoming increasingly obvious that it is going to happen.
And that's a very good point, Lorraine, on which we can hand over to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Manuel Cortez, who is the General Secretary of the Transport Salary and Staff Association. I know the union well. It's my old union from my time in British Vale, but you weren't around at that stage. It was, I think Richard Rosser was the Gensec then. That probably dates me. But today, Manuel is going to talk about the impact on union members. He has a unique distinction. Well, probably not unique, but you represent union members in Ireland and the UK.
Yeah,
I think it's 23,000 members you have.
We are an Irish and British union.
Irish and British. So you see the situation from both sides of the Irish Sea. So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen, and how do you think your members are going to be impacted?
Well, I think the first thing I want to say is thank you very much for having me here today. I am delighted to be back among so many friends in the Irish Labour Party, because I missed the conference last year, but I was delighted to be back this year. And, you know, I know it's early in the morning, and so you're going to pardon my language, but a Tory MP, very aptly, a few days ago, was asked to describe his own party and May's government. And he said it was a shit show. And nothing has been more apt, no word has been more apt than to describe the current state of negotiations. Because what's happening in Britain is that there are negotiations, but not with Brussels. They are within the Tory party and the different wings of that party. And hence why 2 years on from a referendum, we still have no deal, even though there's news breaking that there might be one on the radar. You know what? The view of my union, because we are an Irish and a British union, from the start has been very clear that this is not something that will benefit working people. We were the first union in Britain to come out and say that we had to rethink what had happened in that referendum. We also understand that just staying in Europe is not enough, because the reason that many people voted to leave the EU is because they rightly felt they had been left behind. But that wasn't the fault of the EU, that was mainly the fault of politics in the UK, because we had austerity, and we also had years and years of neglect of our former industrial strongholds, that when the factory left the town or the factory left the city, there were no jobs that would pay the same for those people to go into. But that is homemade, and somehow this found itself becoming an issue around why people voted for Brexit. There's more and more research now showing that austerity itself, since the Tories took over, was a major determinant of why people voted for Brexit. But the reality is that if we leave the EU and we have a negative economic impact, we're going to have austerity on steroids. And the people who are going to pay for that will be the very same people that sadly voted to leave the European Union. And I tell you, because I'm a socialist, I'm an optimist. We haven't left Europe yet. And as long as I have any blood running through my veins, I will be fighting to reverse that decision. Because that is the only outcome that can be good for working people. Let's not forget this, that the Tories didn't want us to leave Europe because it wasn't socialist enough. They wanted us to leave Europe so they could have a race to the bottom and get away with smashing all the protections that working people have got. And it's not just about workers' rights, important as that is to me as the leader of the trade union. You know, as a union leader, I am not in the business of giving our members' rights away. But it's not just about that. It's about food standards. It's about environmental standards. It's about regulation in general. These people want to live in a world where there are no rules. That's the kind of world we want to create, they want to create. And we as socialists stand against everything that these people stand for. For me, the fight against Brexit goes beyond staying in the EU. It's about what kind of world do we want. You know, I cannot believe that I have become one of the most vocal voices in Britain in favour of staying in the EU, because like many of you in this hall, I've been very critical of many aspects. I was here yesterday when you had your debate, rightly so, on refugees and what's happening within Europe. You know, we're not taking responsibility for these people. But I do understand that the choice on the ballot paper wasn't between a socialist utopia and leaving the EU. The choice on the ballot paper was leaving the EU and getting something that was going to be far worse for working people. And as I said, I think that the result can be reversed. We have been campaigning very strongly, and actually our campaign started when our delegates from Ireland came over to see me and told me what a disaster it was going to be for this island, and in particular for the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement. The idea that you can erect any kind of hard border in this island is ridiculous. We cannot go back to the past. It wasn't a good past, it was a terrible past. I thought we were all moving forward, and British and Irish people were finding a new relationship going forward. We cannot draw ourselves back into a potential conflict in the island of Ireland. And look, I'm going to finish because we haven't got a lot of time left. All I say to you, keep the faith. We can stop this, and we will be fighting every inch of the way. The Tories are going to struggle to get any kind of deal through that Parliament. The Labour Party will be voting against any kind of deal because it will never meet our 6 tests. The 6 tests that the Labour Party have got are excellent. They cannot be met. So they're absolutely fantastic. They cannot be met. The exact same benefits of being inside the single market. How can you do that when you leave? You can't. It's impossible. So I support the 6 tests. But the fight is going to be to try, because I think this cannot be settled in Parliament either. You know, Stephen will know more than me about this, but there is no consensus in Parliament for any kind of Brexit. Hard, soft, no Brexit. So actually, I think it's going to have to be put back to the people again.
Thank you very much, Manuel. I should point out that the Brexit motion it comes from Central Council, but it was drafted by Manuel and the TSSA, so it's their motion that we will be voting on later on today. So I want to make that point. Our final speaker today, before we have some questions, is Clara Hannah. Clara's a long-time friend of the Labour Party here. She was, as a councillor, instrumental in introducing a living wage and making Belfast City Council the first council in the country to have a living wage. She was elected to the Assembly in Northern Ireland and is somebody who comes down south on a regular basis. She's born in Mcnamara, so has great links down here. Indeed, her other half, Donal, is an former member of Labour Youth, I think, back in the day. So, Claire, how do you see things working out between ourselves, Good Friday Agreement and the border issues? How do you see them developing?
I think whatever the deal that might look close, and as Steve said, we don't know. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, that ominous phrase from Northern Ireland. But it's very clear that whatever it is, it will be far below the status quo, and the only good and acceptable Brexit is no Brexit. And I must say, I think I might record what you just said and play it to myself every morning to send me back out fighting against Brexit, because whatever about the deal, and it does look like a UK-wide customs arrangement with sort of soft regulatory checks between East and West, but it absolutely remains to be seen whether or not that can be got through Parliament, and I believe that a second referendum is the only fair way to deal with it, because the only, this is like all good compromises, nobody will be happy, but the only urge it satisfies is the let's just get it over with urge that people have on Brexit, and we will not just get it over with. This will mean negotiation on trade and on regulations in perpetuity, and keeping this discussion alive. And I suppose in the terms of the Good Friday Agreement and how it affects Northern Ireland, that's the key problem. While you can address some of the issues around trade and movement of goods, and potentially even address some of the major issues around rights and around the fact that the rights of Irish people and of British people will part company, and the tension that creates. What Brexit has done, it has sharpened all of the lines around identity and constitution and allegiance and borders that the Good Friday Agreement was designed to smooth out. Europe was always a kind of a platform for that shared endeavour and shared identity. It made it not matter in Northern Ireland who was British and who was Irish and who was both and who was neither. And the Brexit referendum and the 2.5 years since have slammed all those very sharp edges back into our everyday discourse, and that's what has caused the damage. And of course, that was pennies from heaven for Sinn Féin and the DUP, who desperately want all of those issues as a way to distract them from having to solve people's problems here and now. But that has certainly, along with a number of other legacy issues, fed into the fact that we have no assembly at this critical time when the whole of Europe is talking about the Good Friday Agreement and how to protect it. If you come to Belfast and Northern Ireland, of course, you'll find that the institutions of that agreement aren't working, and that infantilisation of Northern Ireland and that loss of any voice for people is one of the things that will contribute to more and more people not believing that politics is the way to solve your problems. So I suppose with all of the red line issues that are involved in the stalemate in Northern Ireland, Brexit is of course the most difficult, and I suppose we're focusing a lot on the DUP's intransigence, but of all their blocking of marriage equality and of language rights and so on, I think for most of us it is their failure to understand how disturbing Brexit is that is putting the biggest gulf into politics, and I suppose from Sinn Féin's perspective, the using of Europe not as an issue of our economic prosperity and an issue of opportunity, but just as a way to campaign on Irish unity is also creating a very hard line in terms of the Good Friday Agreement. I don't think you need me to explain to you why all this challenges the peace process. Yes, there is the fact of potential attacks or of civil disobedience, rightly or wrongly, on any border infrastructure or indeed on any additional red tape and regulatory burdens. But really, it's about the disruption of that very delicate equilibrium in Northern Ireland and those very complex relationships, and the transformation of this issue of being about prosperity and about a shared future to being zero-sum between unionism and nationalism. It remains to be seen how we get out of it. I don't think you can completely put the genie back in the bottle in terms of Brexit, and indeed in terms of the many millions of people who voted for it, particularly in England. But as Manuel and others have said, the reason that they voted, Europe was not the problem and Brexit is not the solution. So I think that the neatest way out of this is a people's vote, and I really look forward to the Labour Party and voices like yours saying to people, we understand why you felt vulnerable in the labour market, we understand all the concerns that you had about public services, but you can have those services or you can have Brexit, and you can't have both. So those issues and the devastating effect it'll have on Good Friday Agreement and Northern Ireland should be in the centre of any second referendum.
Great. Thanks very much, Claire. Now, we have some time for a few questions. I've had quite a few people indicate we're going to try to get them all in before this session concludes. The first speaker is at the back of the hall. Dermot, by the way, is running around with the microphone, so he'll hand that to you. The first speaker is Michael Mcnamara. And can I ask people, when they make their contribution, to state their name and branch, please? Michael, over to you. Yeah. And please also keep it to within a minute.
Yeah, Michael Mcnamara, Ennis Branch. I suppose the question is really justice and home affairs. I mean, I think Brexit could have very profound implications in Ireland. I'm just wondering if the panel have any views on that. Insofar as I think Ireland has very much sort of sailed in the slipstream of Britannia on justice and home affairs, opted out of a lot of justice and home affairs provisions in the treaties of Amsterdam and subsequent treaties, such as like the common asylum area, etc. And I just wonder, is that, I mean, there's a lot of discussion of the implications of Brexit for taxation, corporate taxation, digital taxation, etc. But is that Irish opt-out feasible in a post-Brexit scenario? I mean, can Ireland be the only outlier?
Great. Thank you, Michael. Behind you is Dermot. We have 7 people indicating, so I'm going to close the floor there because I've been told by the General Secretary that we have to wrap up fairly quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take those 7 people. Angela, I've got you. And I'm going to then go over and ask our panellists to try to answer the questions. So the next questioner, and please, Fintan, 1 minute maximum, over here, just on your left, Dermot. It's Fintan behind you, Angela.
Hi.
Angela, it's Fintan behind you.
Thank.
Behind you, Fintan was first. Right, I have you, Angela. I'll come to you in turn. That's okay.
Yeah, my name is Finn Barghini, down in Mead Branch, Dublin Bay North. I think we need to give far more attention to the internationalist approach of the socialist movement and make links with our colleagues in Germany and France, Italy and other countries where we have a socialist movement. I'd like to hear more about involving them and the European trade union movement. Brexit is a thoroughly reactionary right-wing movement from start to finish. Even though workers voted for it, it's led by extreme right-wingers like Farage, Boris Johnson, Rees-Mogg, Ian Duncan-Smith. We need to recognise that a lot more. It's a right-wing movement which is a lot in common with what's happening in Hungary, in Poland, in Italy, of course Trump, in America and Brazil. It's a right-wing movement that's affecting us, and that needs to be recognised, and we need to form links. And there's too much focus in Ireland on how it affects Ireland solely. And some people are celebrating the fact that English workers will lose their jobs because industries will shift and come over here instead. And that's saying it's an advantage to us. So the focus should change. We're an internationalist party, we're a socialist party, and the focus should change. And I'm interested to hear the comments, particularly from Britain, of our links and the way in which we can use these links with the European socialist movement and with the European trade union movement to raise questions like a minimum wage, public services, conditions of work, health and safety, how these can be protected by the involvement of the socialist parties and the trade union movement. And there was a time when the majority of EU governments were socialist governments. And I'm looking forward to the day when that's going to come back again.
Yeah. Thanks, Finbar. The next speaker is at the very front on the left, Dermot, and it's Shaunell Harvey.
Just to gary os na cainteanna bhíogan ar maidin tamse búr an mhaol ar carta déine go háras a tuaisceart agus asam comá. I think we really need to focus on the fact, as Finn said, that this is a fundamental attack on human and civil rights, and I think it's deliberately designed as such. And it's the ultimate, if we like, the ultimate dream of the Friedman and Thatcherite movement towards breaking workers' rights within the European Union. And I suppose, just particularly in relation to what the party leader said last night, I'd like to welcome Claire here as our comrade and those other comrades from the SDLP. And I really hope that the party leader means what he says and that we will not leave a vacuum for people who believe in fundamental rights and decent politics in the 6 counties.
Thanks, Sean. And indeed, we're joined in the audience today by the International Secretary of the SDLP and by, I think, the Chairman of the SDLP Youth there. So you're very welcome, both of you. The next speaker is this gentleman here.
Audrin Ray Dunmead branch. Just, I think we have to assume that it will actually happen. And the question comes is, where do we position ourselves post-Brexit? A lot of the focus has very much been on just on the border issue, but actually the integration with Europe, the speed it will actually go at after Britain. We've nowhere to hide behind the kind of liberal economic model that Britain has had once they're gone. So how can we kind of our relationship with Britain and our relationship with the EU after?
Thank you very much. Angela, you're next.
Thank you very much to everyone for your very interesting contributions. I would just like to ask, or Stephen in particular, as a fellow Labour person in England, I've got a lot. I'm an exile Brummie living in Ireland for over 40 years. But people I know over there just can't believe that the Labour Party top echelons are so negative about remaining in the European Union. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn and John MacDonald are really a disgrace. I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but, you know, they know that so many people, particularly the people, how many Labour people were out in that march in London the other week? A massive amount of, even people who'd voted for Brexit and have changed their minds. And there's been total silence from Jeremy Corbyn. He was in Geneva or something on the day. So I'm sorry to speak about your party leader like that. But really, I think you are in the majority of Labour voters. And thank you very much
Angela.
for it.
If you could just hand the mic to the gentleman behind you. Yep. Thanks. And then the final speaker will be at the front, John.
John O'Brien from Drumcondra, Glasnevin branch. I'd like perhaps to just direct 2 questions following on from this colleague's comment about the British Labour Party, and I'd like to address this to Stephen Pound in particular. And I suppose it's about a perceived lack of clarity in terms of where the Labour Party appears to be on either definitely an anti-Brexit stance. And unfortunately then, if I can address my comments to Claire from SDLP.
We're actually under time, John, so
yeah,
a question.
Just very, very quick question, and it may be odd asking SDLP a similar question, but is there any groundswell of opinion in north of the border in getting Sinn Féin to step up to the mark on this particular question and standing at Westminster to go against Brexit? Thank you.
Thanks, John. Our final speaker is also John Feely from the front here. Thanks, Dermot.
Thank you, Chair. John Feely, Leitrim branch, and for a spell in the 60s, a member of the Northern Ireland Labour Party. Now, the two issues I want to raise is health and jobs. As a border county, there's been a development occurring, particularly with Auchnagelvin Hospital in Derry and Dairy Lund in Derry and Donegal. So that development and those potential developments with Enniskillen hospitals, we need to keep that going in some form, shape or form, even after Brexit. Then on the jobs front, we've had quite a few good developments occurring with EU funding, like OMA and Carrick and Shannon. We've got a lot of EU funding on the jobs initiatives. So that, even after Brexit, we have to retain some format of linking, because the border, in my head, is now just in my head, and I prefer us to see that if we can have our jobs and our health services, we're all united as one people.
Great, thank you very much, John. We're going to go back to our panellists now. We're going to do it the other way around this time. So I'm going to start with Claire and work our way over.
There were a lot there, and if I answered
were
them
indeed.
all, we would have
Try to pick the ones that you think you're best
to midnight
suited to.
and beyond. But I think the general issue about Brexit unleashing the forces of the right is correct, and that's why. And I share the frustration about the Labour Party's handling of this in a lot of respects. I think in its kindest, it can be summed up as don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake, and I think that's what some in the Labour Party are thinking. You know, allow Brexit to be totally ballsed up and then come in on the back of it, but that's far too much of a scorched earth. That's far too much of a scorched earth approach to me. And while, Emmanuel, you put it very well, that it wasn't a choice between a socialist utopia and the EU, and I'm frustrated with the Lexit analysis and criticism of the EU, because all of those criticisms can equally be applied to the nation state, and we're not in any way saying that the EU is perfect, although it is a product of its elected representatives from the member states, but it is impossible to see how handing the reins to the deregulators and erecting more borders are going to improve life for any of those people. The other questions as regards the SDLP in the North and realignment, I spoke about those hard lines to give you the context, and the context is polarisation. It is the fact that at the best of times our politics are dominated by the green and the orange. At the best of times we are in an up and down assembly. It's very difficult to be a full-throated social democrat when you're just tinkering around with your block grant. It's very difficult to be a party of Labour when trade unions can't affiliate for obvious reasons. And it is very difficult to be told that having a view on the constitutional question is sectarian. This is a room full of political people. We have views on everything from space travel to speed bumps and the European Union, and to say to people in the North that if you have a view on the constitutional question you're being sectarian is insulting. So I say all this just to outline the context. Our party currently has no platform. We're 22 months without a government. We will be at a minimum 12 more. There's no great movement among people for that to change. There's no fresh political air. So that's the context why some people are thinking about realignment. Yep. I don't agree with it. I support the John Hume analysis. If the problem has not changed and the problem is division and a lack of a shared platform for politics, then the solution has not changed, and that's what we need to provide. So that's the context of the existentialist crisis that a lot in the SDLP are saying, are feeling. I am firmly of the view, and I know many of the others are as well, that Fianna Fáil does not solve those problems. It does not solve our problems of division. I know my voters, a growing portion of whom would not be traditionally of a nationalist background, they're not voting for the soldiers of destiny, the people who are newly interested in Irish unity. And we can't ignore, Democratic Ireland needs to own the fact that very many moderate nationalist and centrist people, including moderate unions, want to get as far away as they possibly can from the toxic English nationalism that has caused Brexit. And that has changed the dynamic, and Democratic democratic Ireland needs to own it. But those people will not be voting for any sort of dancing at the crossroads sort of Ireland. They're voting for a modern, open economy of the type that you have tried to build. And as we look at the challenges around renewable heat incentive and good governance, I don't believe that Fianna Fáil solves it. But I want to give you that context, and there are many people within the SDLP and in other political movements and people who are non-aligned who still see the need for politics of the left in a non-sectarian platform.
That's good to hear.
Irish Labour is not the solution. British Labour is not the solution. It will have to be, as the SDLP was, a manifestation of those in Northern Ireland. But I look forward to working with you all to try and create that if we have to.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. Manuel.
You know, I want to start off by saying that the Brexit bag is clearly now out of the bag. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who supported Brexit, said that it will take 50 years to see the benefits of Brexit. Perhaps for someone who's 3 centuries behind the rest of us, 50 years is not a long time. But for the rest of us, that is a lifetime. It's a nonsense. And just to pick up on the point of the comrade at the back about internationalism, our union takes that very seriously. So we have worked very closely with comrades in Zimbabwe who've been going through a terrible time. We always bring international speakers to our conference, but what we are actually seeing in this world is that the people who want to build walls rather than bridges are winning. Look at Trump, what he's doing in America. Look at what's happening in Hungary. Look what's happening across all over Europe. And I say this, and I say this very strongly, because sometimes we in the left fall for some of these traps and start to argue for immigration controls and other measures. If you give these people an inch, they'll take a mile. The only response we can have to these people is what we have done and always done. When they come out to peddle the hate, we confront them. And as many people went over from Ireland, from Britain, from America, from across the world, went to die and fight in Spain against a rising fascist tide, no pasarán, comrades.
Thanks very much, Manuel. Lorraine.
Yeah. Can I just say, don't get me wrong, and I think everybody in this room completely would wish for a people's vote. I mean, to us, it's a no-brainer. It is the solution. It is what we want Stephen Brown to bring back to the UK Labour Party as the kind of the obvious solution, even if it is difficult. But I'm afraid, comrades, we might be here at a stage where events are overtaking us. This genie is out of the bottle, and there's no doubt that the final deal has not been signed off, but it is coming closer. And in terms of the real, where does Ireland sit? Like we are an internationalist party. We are all devastated about Brexit. I don't think that's understating it, but as Ireland, how do we survive in this new context if there is a deal? And I think the alignment with what other countries within Europe do we need to start seriously engaging. There's no doubt we have a very good reputation in Ireland, or in Europe. We punch above our weight. We have, but I think Michael Mcnamara's point is very well made, that now we will be the only common law country in Europe. This could be a very big shift. We could eventually start, moving towards a codification of our law, European style. So we are, I mean, that's a long way down the line, but definitely we are going to have to start becoming more fully fledged Europeans, because we have straddled both in the past. And now what we need to concentrate on, I think, is as a party, as a movement, is shaping that Europe. What kind of a Europe do we want? And to emphasise the social... And let's also be clear, the UK was not a huge friend of social Europe. Maybe there is a chance that actually... And we want our British friends to come with us on this journey. But if they're not going to, we also have to look at how we can continue to fight for social Europe from an Irish perspective.
Thank you, Lorraine. Stephen.
Can I apologise to Michael, Finbar, Sean, Aldrin, Angela, John and John for not responding to you all individually. I'm prepared at great personal sacrifice to hang around in the bar afterwards if any of you wish to discuss that, although quite clearly I could not accept a drink from you, unless you absolutely insist. But look, there's some incredibly important things. There are a huge range of unintended consequences from this ludicrous Suicide Act that the United Kingdom took in June 2016. One is the primacy of international labour, because we're going to have to fill that vacuum. If we are faced with a post-Brexit deregulated Europe, and I think Sean's point was very, very powerful on this one, then someone else is going to have to come in and fill that vacuum. Things like the Working Time Directive are unbelievably important, and could not have been achieved one by one unless we actually beefed up the International Labour Organization. We worked links between trade unions across countries. And I'm not talking about a shadow Europe. I'm actually talking about a workers' solidarity in Europe, which actually is supplementary and complementary to that. The other thing is, you'll be amazed how many people in GB, and certainly in my constituency, are now saying to me over and over again, why is Ireland divided? Does it actually make sense? The three major pieces of legislation that were brought into the British Parliament between 1886 and 1914 all talked about 6 of the 9 counties of Ulster being temporarily separated. It was only going to be for 6 months, 2 years, or 4 years. Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is, as Guy Verhofstadt said when he was actually trying to show him where the border was. He was walking from Monaghan trying to see the border. And an Irish MEP said, "You've come to see the border you can't see." And Verhofstadt said, "Madam, I am from Belgium. I am familiar with the concept of surrealism." And this is actually the reality. So I think that there will be unintended consequences, not all wholly negative, but the real question is the Angela's Ashes question now, which I would like to avoid but can't. Excuse me. There has been a lack of clarity on the position of the British Labour Party. Sorry, that's Labour Party head office are just taking my voice away from you. in Peter Mandelson's day, they used to do that all the time. But,
zapped you.
Yeah. Well, look, there be in no doubt whatsoever that the British Labour Party is a pro-European party. Our membership, our individual MPs, our MEPs, all of us, we are pro-European. We value and cherish, and above all, we recognise the delicacy of the architecture of the peace process. And once you start taking bricks away from the foundations, then the architecture starts to shatter and to tremble. We realise that this is actually not just some abstruse minor political argument amongst people who want to talk about these things late into the night. It is actually a life and death issue. And people don't understand that the border on the island of Ireland is not just a geographical border. It's a border through the psyche, through the soul of a nation. But I want to see more clarity from the Labour Party. Our position at the moment is that we are not in favour of an additional referendum, a second or a third, depending on what you call 1975. Mostly because the dial hasn't switched that much. It is still a split country. There were 700,000 people last week, but there were 7,000 people who voted to remain. That's the real difficulty. What we want to do, by all means, we would love to reset the button and to actually go back to how it was before that. But in the meantime, I've got to be in Ardglass talking to people about fishing rights. I've got to be on the border talking about the realities of it. I've got to actually it's not just making the best of a bad job. It's just doing what has to be done in the meantime. I cannot put everything on the back of a unicorn that may or may not exist. Whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know. But whatever we do, we have to somehow preserve the peace, the solidarity, the international respect for human rights and civil rights and basic decency that the European Union expressed. And if we do that through Brussels, so be it. If we have to do it outside, then I have to say the Labour movement is so powerful and so strong and so necessary and so vital that will have to happen, because otherwise their only future is a dystopian Europe with no regulation and a return to Victorian values. I'm not going to go there, and I don't think this party is going to go there either. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And can I just, on behalf of all of us, if you could express your thanks to all of our panellists here today, and of course thank you very much for coming along, attending, and for your questions. Before we conclude, I have to officially move the Brexit motion on behalf of the Central Council. I move that. I need a formal seconder from the floor. I've got a formal seconder from Tom Cosgrove. It's over to you, Chair, now to call a vote, if necessary, on that. And once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominic, and delegates. Motion number 91 is before the floor. We've had lots of discussion on it. I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against. I declare the motion carried unanimously. And now we are proceeding to the final session of conference around the issues of workers' rights and business, enterprise and innovation. And I think that it's the final session because we're nearly unanimous in this party on all these issues. But I wonder, would it be possible for the movers of motions 92, 93, 94, 95 and 96 to agree, given the lateness of the hour, to formally move them? Let's see how we do. I take number 92, very important constituency, in the name of Wicklow Constituency Council. The motion is firmly moved by the constituency chair, John Kenna. It's firmly seconded by. It's firmly seconded. Thank you, delegates. Motion 92 is firmly moved and seconded. Motion number 93, in the name of Sandyford Branch. Formally moved, Alex, thank you. Is it formally seconded? Formally seconded, Dermot, thank you. And motion number 94, calling for a 6-hour day with no loss of pay, which is being moved by the NUI Galway branch in Galway West. Is there anybody here from the NUI Galway branch in Galway West? So then the motion falls. So then, is there anybody here? Are you from the NUI Galway branch? No, your first cousins doesn't do here. Motion number 94 falls. Motion number 95 in the name of the Labour Trade Union section. Is there anybody here from the Labour Trade Union section? I see Willie Hamilton. The motion is firmly moved. Is firmly seconded. Thank you, Andrew. And motion number 96 in the name of the Gralton Leitrim branch, moved by John Feely. Is there somebody to formally second it? Take it as formally seconded. So, in the context of the panel discussion, which Fiona will be chairing, we can deal with motions 92, 93, 94 is not before the floor. Fiona, it has fallen. 95 and 96. And before we hand over to Fiona to chair the panel, I want to call on the chair of Standing Orders to move Standing Orders report number 5? 6. In relation to time.
Good. I think it's afternoon, delegates. Standing Orders proposes extending conference until 1:45 at the discretion of the chair.
Is there a seconder for? Seconded by Willie Hamilton. Is it agreed? Agreed. Thank you, delegates. Fiona, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Okay, everyone can hear me. Good afternoon, comrade delegates, and I admire your resilience and your enthusiasm to stay for the last session of conference. A session which is actually really, really important in terms of the issues that we're going to deal with. It's workers' rights, it's collective bargaining, and also the issue of precarity and legislation. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. I have great pleasure to share the panel with Senator Jed Nash. As you know, Jed Nash has worked tirelessly on workers' rights from his time as a minister right through to his senatorship now, when he's been working with a number of trade unions in the most recent past. To my left is Brian Nolan. Brian is the Deputy General Secretary of the biggest craft union in the country, Connect Trade Union, and he is no stranger to the issues of precarity and bogus self-employment in the construction industry. Next to Brian is Sheila Noonan. Sheila is the General Secretary of the INTO, the National Teachers' Organisation, and President of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. And again, Sheila is very familiar with all of the issues that face workers in terms of precarity and also in terms of some of the austerity issues that we've had to deal with. Is my mic on? Hello? Mic's gone. Okay, it's back. Cheers. In the issues of austerity from the recent downturn. Next to Sheila is John Douglas, and John is the General Secretary of Mandate and also a member of the Executive Panel of Congress. I'm gone again. Okay, I'm back. And John has been dealing with, as you know, some of the most difficult employers in the country in the retail sector. I think they use, unfortunately, the retail membership as a battering ram to introduce new and exploitative measures for workers. And John has been to the forefront of some amazing campaigns with Dunn's and Tesco and Lloyd's. And next to John is Ethel Buckley. Ethel is the Deputy General Secretary of SIP2. And again, Ethel comes from a very strong organising campaign background. She's had some amazing successes with catering staff, contract cleaning and also security, but as well as that, more recently, with the ladies football team and obviously the Cleary's workers with the debacle that happened there. And most recently over the summer, I think there was some successes which we'll deal with under the Competition Act. So I'd like the conference to very warmly welcome our panel for this last session on workers' rights. So the way I'm going to set this up, I'm going to ask each of our panellists a question around some of the issues they're dealing with, and then we'll ask Jed Nash to respond to that, if that's okay with everyone. Sheila, can I go to you first in terms of collective bargaining and some of the issues that are facing the broader trade union movement, and perhaps even touch on some of the issues you've dealt with in the public sector agreement and the public sector issues?
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is this is a really welcome debate, because the Irish Congress of Trade Union, representing the 600,000 workers, this is the key debate at the moment in terms of the capacity of the trade union movement to be able to represent its workers in a variety of fora. And so while employment has improved since the recession, the building blocks that are needed to put in a robust collective bargaining, scaffolding and structure leave a lot to be desired. So I think the values that are expressed in the Charter here today very much resonate, I think, with the issues that are coming up in the last few years. I mean, particularly the whole issue of low pay, clearly, in terms of minimum wage and the Low Pay Commission work in particular, and that's been very useful. But the legislative pieces, I think, are something that Congress really wants to see progressing, because with all of the organising, unless we can get the actual legislative base for that representation, that is going to be difficult. I mean, there's no doubt about it, the uncertainty, the insecurity in Irish society brought about by low pay is not good for Irish society. On a wider front then, Fiona, you will be aware that not just has the low wage, low pay economy impacted on everybody, but it's seeping out into issues of childcare, it's seeping out into issues of homelessness and housing. Mm-hmm. So it's actually contributing to constant inequalities. Clearly in the public sector side, we're washing out some of the worst incidences of the recession in our own union. You'll be very aware that there's been a very contested debate about pay inequality over the last, and that's not over yet. I think a very important piece in the, at least public servants, I suppose, we have a stronger collective bargaining space, but the other piece would be around the commitments about outsourcing, which are very, very precious, I think, within the public sector agreements, and something we need to guard as well. But in overall terms, just to say, I think it's welcome to see a good debate. I think I couldn't but concur with the various elements of that, but particularly ICTU want to see the legislative pieces strengthened, because that then gives the organising piece something to be, to know that if they bring the organising home, there is a place to prosecute on behalf of workers.
Okay, thanks, Sheila. And just going to the legislative piece, John, I know for your workers, if and when contract 0 hours are some of the key issues that you face. A broader legislative space or more protections in law, is that what you're looking for? Is it something that the Labour Party is going to help?
It certainly would be part of the agenda and certainly part of the solution. It's not the full solution, and I have to acknowledge that Senator Nash has been very helpful in terms of putting together a support mechanism for our own union in terms of the miscellaneous provisions bill and maybe putting decency thresholds, but that's all they are. They're safety nets against the worst exploitative contracts, but there's nothing going to replace collectivism and collective bargaining and collective union organisation and workers working together, and that's the big challenge for us all in the trade union movement. There's no doubt about that. At this point in time, the share of wealth being created globally, there's a larger share going to capital and a kind of an ever-diminishing share going to labour, and that's reflective of the weakness of the trade union movement globally, but also in Ireland. Until we get that piece right, we need to have the kind of legislative framework to make sure that, you know, it doesn't hit the floor. But really the trade union movement has got to collectively organise and increase density. And the reason we have precarious type contracts, the reason we have exploitative contracts, zero-hour contracts, because the trade union movement generally is not strong. If we were strong, we'd be able to fight that kind of in the trenches. We've tried to fight it against Lloyd's Pharmacy. They threw money at it. They threw redundancy packages. We tried to fight it against Dunnes Stores. We're barred out of all their stores. There's no shop stewards. There's no union notice board. You're not allowed to wear a union badge. Recently, Tesco, about 2 years ago, we took on Tesco because we're trying to reduce terms and conditions of employment. We're barred out of all their stores now in Tesco. No union activity, no union notice boards, no more collective bargaining. They've effectively de-recognised the union with impunity, because we do not have collective bargaining legislation. So we need pillars of decency around collective bargaining, around precarious employment, around zero-hour contracts. And then the trade union movement needs to get its act together and start organising and mobilising.
Thanks, John. And can I go to Ethel then in terms of, you know, John has led into organising collective bargaining, campaigning. You're a veteran in that area. You've had some successes. You've had some really difficult challenges. Do you want to maybe talk about some of the issues around the Cleary's workers and then the success of the summer?
Yeah. So at the conference last year, the Justice for Cleary's Workers campaign won the Larkin Justice Award, Thirst for Justice Award. Yeah. And that was really welcome. It was a really welcome recognition from the Labour Party of the, I suppose, the role really that the workers in Cleary's played themselves in that campaign. The campaign was very high profile, I think. It was pretty successful campaign in union campaigning terms, but I would say that the reason why it was successful, and I think that there's learning for all union organising and campaigning in this, and maybe political campaigning as well, the reason why it was successful was the workers themselves were front and centre of that campaign. It wasn't about a trade union official advocating on behalf of workers, really. It was about trade union officials like myself and Theresa Hannick and Robbie Purfield, the people who worked with me on that campaign, giving the tools to the workers to run their own campaign and to be in the media advocating on behalf of their own campaign. And I think there is a great benefit in that kind of testimonial type campaigning where the person affected by the issue is the person who's advocating the solution to the issue. I'm not trying to do trade union officials out of jobs now, but our role is to enable workers, you know. And there's some really interesting debates going on in the trade union movement currently about the kind of trade unionism that we want to operate in this country. I suppose it's fair to say that we had a number of decades of a more kind of servicing style trade unionism, and some of the unions affiliated to Congress are now trying. It's difficult. I know John's union is trying, our union is trying, Connect is trying, the INTO is trying to move to a more recruitment and organising focused style of trade unionism. And that's not to say that you don't do great servicing. You have to, because members leave or members won't join if you're not providing a great service. But we're very focused now on ensuring that people are joining our unions in unionised workplaces and in new workplaces. Because the greatest challenge facing us is not even a legislative challenge, I would say. The greatest challenge facing the labour movement, both the trade union side of it and the political side, is that less people are joining trade unions now than used to in the past. Absolutely. And in trade union terms or industrial relations terms, we talk about that as density. There is a drop in our density, and like John said, when your density drops, your bargaining power drops. Anyone who's ever engaged in any kind of negotiation knows that if you go into the negotiation with a strong hand, whether that's at the level of a company or an industry, if you go in with a strong hand, you're going to get a better outcome. So the challenge for us really is to convince workers to come with us and to join us and to organise their workplaces. It's very challenging. There are so many. There are legislative barriers in this country, but there are other barriers as well. I would say a big one is the media. The mainstream media does not give trade unions a fair shake. But we have an opportunity now of making our own media, which is great in the new kind of digital media age. So there are some initial thoughts on
union organising, Fiona.
Thanks, Ethel. And before we deal with some of the issues that everyone has raised, I want to go to Brian and ask Brian about the construction sector. I mean, you took a massive hit in the downturn. That some other changes have happened in terms of bogus self-employment. There's some moves around that. So do you want to talk to us about the members?
Connect Trade Union is Ireland's largest craft union. Mechanical, electrical and construction workers. We work closely with the other construction unions, SIP2, UCAT, would have been a standalone union, now part of Connect, the Bricklayers Union, BATU, OPATSI and Unite, in respect of the issues that we, I suppose, have adopted in the wake of the last recession. But bogus self-employment being one of them is not a new phenomenon. It's something that's been rebranded and repackaged. It effectively came from the structures of revenue allowing individuals to address themselves as self-employed when in fact they're not, and paying their tax in a way that denies the exchequer and the individual the full benefits of paying tax and social insurance. Moving that on to post-recession, it's now an open phenomenon insofar as you can go onto Facebook today and you can look at various different recruitment agencies who will offer you employment on the construction side, offering one rate to become a PAY employee and another rate to work as self-employed. So they're quite brazen and open about this. The difficulty we've had, I suppose, structurally is that the Labour Inspectorate isn't manned sufficiently to deal with it. And Revenue may very well, in my opinion, look at this as a way of getting some tax rather than no tax, as opposed to, say, the anecdotal tales of people signing on a Monday and then going to work in the afternoon. Those days don't have to happen now because the individual can pay their tax in such a way that it's efficient for everyone bar the state. There's an education process we've been involved in for the last number of years, both educating employers and workers. It would be unfair to say that it's at the foot of every employer. I mean, there are a lot of workers, and we've raised this many a time with different departments on publicly funded jobs in relation to the standard of work. And the reason the standard of work has slipped is, by and large, because individuals as self-employed do not have to prove qualification and standards. So when you talk about craft workers, you're talking about young workers initially who serve an apprenticeship, qualify, very well skilled. I mean, we're talking about apprenticeships that are world class. Ireland can boast that with no competition. And that's obvious because a lot of our workers travel the world and are adopted all over the world because of their skill sets. They then move on into the working life with a qualification, a statutory qualification that we give apprentices come tradespeople. The problem with bogus self-employment is anyone comes into the market, portrays themselves, and in my opinion this has become more evident in the debacle that is the schools issue. Yeah, the schools building, and it's not confined to schools. I mean, we've raised issues with various ministers and departments on hospitals, schools, and various different projects. So we would continue to have a concern. The bogus self-employment is not just about the bottom line in terms of rates of pay and so on. It has a huge impact on that, but it has a bigger impact in terms of the structure of apprenticeships, the structures of the workforce, standards and regulation. So moving it on, in terms of the impact, we're talking about individuals who are self-employed are not paying a proficient amount of social insurance. They may pay as an employer but not as an employee. And we've worked with Senator Nash in terms of the input we've put into the bill he has. And we do see this as an extra step to get where we need to be. John's right in what he says, though. I mean, we can't rest purely on legislation because people break the law. That's a fact. We have a minimum rate of pay. We have sexual employment orders which give guaranteed rates of pay. And funny enough, I was just looking at bits of the conference yesterday on TV and the conversation about gender pay equality. We have sexual employment orders that don't discriminate. And yet we have bogus self-employment which obliterates that. So it's very important that we do attack the concept of bogus self-employment or any model that's used by employers, whether they're agencies, subcontractors, whatever they might be, whether they're on publicly funded jobs, large-scale FDIs. We have laws. We're looking to further enhance them through this bill. It's important that people are held accountable, and the government should be reminded, and whichever government that is in the future should be reminded, that we need to pursue absolute compliance with those pieces of legislation.
Thanks, Brian. And I think some of the issues that everyone has raised.
Thank you.
I think some of the issues that everyone has raised on the panel so far this morning does appear in the Decent Work for All document that we have been working on with Senator Nash and the Policy and Planning Committee and the Labour Trade Union section. So we're delighted that some of the key issues that the trade union movement are hoping to progress, that we can work with you on that. So I just ask Senator Nash now to respond to some of those issues.
Firstly, I just want to thank our colleagues from the various unions for joining us this morning. I've had the great pleasure over the last few years of working hand in glove with many of you to try to do our very best to develop that floor of decency beneath which no Irish worker or no Irish citizen should be allowed to fall. And I think we've had some success in doing that. But clearly, in some respects, the state hasn't gone far enough to ensure that that floor of decency is protected and enhanced over the next period of time. This weekend, at this conference, I was really gratified, and I mentioned it on Friday night, that 1 in 5 of all motions refer to workers' rights, employment protections, and enhancing our social protection system to protect the interests of people who don't have work and who wish to work. And I think that's an important restatement of our values as a party. But it's up to us, of course, to put meat on those bones, to bring the legislative solutions forward and improve that regulatory framework. And that's what we're trying to do day in, day out. We can't end poverty, as is our historic mission in the Labour Party, if we don't ensure decency in the workplace. That's a fundamental point that I want to make, and a fundamental point I think that we should all go home with today. And I'm glad that we've reasserted our position on that. We did introduce new collective bargaining laws back in 2015, and they went to some degree to providing a framework within which trade unions can organise and prosecute cases in the Labour Court to try to organise for recognition, collective agreements and so on. But we would accept, of course, while it is a step in the right direction, it's far from the utopia that any of us on this platform or indeed in the audience would desire to have. And in this document we state very, very clearly, and myself and Jack O'Connor, our party chair, and others in the party are working on ways in which we can enhance that legislation in the first instance, but also, I think, meet that historic challenge of ensuring that we've got a constitutional framework in this country that ensures collective bargaining rights for everybody and trade union recognition as a basic right and entitlement for every single citizen in this country. And I want to restate our commitment to that here today. We have sectoral bargaining provisions in, of course, the 2015 Act that Connect Trade Union and SIPTU have used very, very cleverly. It probably covers maybe about 70,000–80,000 workers at this point in time, and that's a very, very positive thing. Introducing new statutory minimum pay rates for construction workers across lots of different grades. I know, Brian, you're working at the moment on a potential new sectoral employment order for electrical workers. Just made it, in fact, and that's actually where industry and trade unions are coming together actually in common cause to try to ensure that there are decent protections and that floor beneath which nobody in an industry should be allowed to fall. Just to conclude in terms of this contribution, there are far too many people going to bed tonight in this country that they just don't know how much money they're going to earn this week. Hard-working people. Don't have income security, no idea, no certainty around the hours that they're going to work. And I'm very proud of the pioneering work that this party did in government to launch an all-out assault on low hours work, zero-hour contracts and if and when contracts. And we worked very closely with Congress and with John, in particular when John was President of Congress, to work with the University of Limerick originally to bring that report to government. Unfortunately, I was a casualty of the last general election. I'll say frankly, it's because the Labour Party is not in government that there have been excessive delays in bringing that legislation forward to provide the protections that workers on low-hour contracts need. We have legislation before us in the Oireachtas at the moment, the Employment Miscellaneous Provisions Bill, that will include banded hour arrangements for workers, will ensure that the top 5 terms and conditions of your contract, you'll be provided with them on your first week in the workplace, important protections. But in my own view, that doesn't go far enough. And to be frank, this legislation, and Regina Doherty, the current Minister, the Fine Gael Minister, is only going as far as IBEC will allow her to. This doesn't deal with the fundamental point of if and when contracts. this particular legislation will not give protection to if and when workers, because in order to enjoy the provisions and the protections of this legislation, you need a contract to defend. And if you're an if and when worker, you have no idea whatsoever what hours you're going to work that week or that day, for example. You have no protections whatsoever. There's no what we call mutuality of obligation. The employer has no obligation to you to give you any hours or to explain to you why you're not having hours or to compensate you for those hours, and you have no obligation to him or her either. So my fear is that if and when contracts, because they're not covered in this legislation, those arrangements will become the contractual or the arrangement of choice, I might say, for bad employers. And we all know in this hall, and our colleagues here on the platform know only too well, that there are enough employers in this country who are prepared to exploit those loopholes, and that's a loophole that cannot go unchallenged.
Thanks, Stuart, for that. John, can I just go back to you then and ask you, in terms of, say, collective bargaining legislation, how do you think that will impact on your workers if it was something we were to get? Can you explain to people what it means? Because I know from the Labour Trade Union section we talk about certain phrases, and I don't think everybody understands exactly what it would mean in reality. So could you maybe take us through what that might look like?
Yeah, I think it sets the framework and the narrative around which trade unions need to organise. At the moment, you really have no rights. I mean, you have your right to join a trade union, but you have no right for that union to act on your behalf. So it's a bit like joining a golf club, but you're not allowed to play golf, which is a nonsense, right? But if the narrative was changed and there was collective bargaining rights as part of your right to join a trade union, the employer also has to engage with you. I think that sets the narrative then for a situation whereby the trade union movement can get its own house in order and start organising, recruiting. At least if workers had some light at the end of the tunnel where they could say, well, if we join a trade union, that union would be able to act on our behalf. At the moment, they can join a trade union, but that union is stopped in its tracks from acting on their behalf. Now, the framework of a constitutional referendum on the right to be joined and be a member of a trade union, but also for that trade union to collectively bargain on workers' behalf, would certainly set that narrative. I think that's very, very important. I mean, we have members in the retail sector, and big companies, big multinational retail companies, who that company, very profitable companies, only guarantee those workers 8 hours a week. Now, they could be working 30, they could be working 40 hours for years. But the threat is that employer comes in, right? You join the union, your hours are cut down to 8 hours, right? You become a bit bulgy, maybe you come up the scale, maybe you get on the top point of the scale after 5 or 6 years. Hour substitution, take them off, Ethel, give them to the first person in on the job. So all that exploitation is out, all that uncertainty is out there, and the Employment Miscellaneous Bill will go some way to resolving that. But the real way to resolving it is, I believe, right, when we put the kind of framework in place, is for the trade union movement to become a movement. Yeah. We're not a movement. If Tesco or Dunnes Stores knew that 700,000 workers on this island and their families are watching and will vote with their books in their pocket, right, with their shopping trolley, that's a big lot of power. We need to mobilise, and we need to do a Ryanair campaign and say it's not good enough, right, to make billions of profits and to pay your chief executives billions in bonuses, right, while your frontline staff are only guaranteed 8 hours a week. And that's the movement we need to create.
It's amazing, and we discussed it here on Friday night during the kind of social protection motions, the amount of money that this state, our citizens, taxpayers, are providing through the social protection systems to subsidise low wages. Poverty pay that John's members, notwithstanding the hard work that yourself, Willie Hamilton and others are doing to try to improve the situation for low-paid workers in the retail sector, several £100 million each year that could be better deployed in public housing projects, in dealing with health waiting lists and making education genuinely free. We're actually subsidising. It's a form of corporate welfare for, and let's name them, Tesco's, Dunnes Stores and others. People are working really, really hard who, at the end of the week, have to rely on the Department of Social Protection to top up their wages. There's no dignity in that. No, no dignity whatsoever. We need to collectively address that. The point about an amendment to the Constitution in relation to trade union recognition and collective bargaining is a really, really interesting one, and it's a battle. We're going to have a battle royale on our hands to get that through. All of us in this room might be in agreement with that, but we'd be surprised at the number of people who aren't. We're proud in the Labour Party of the role that we played in terms of the marriage equality referendum, in terms of the 8th Amendment, an amendment we never believed should have been in the Constitution in the first place back in 1983. And they were tough battles to win. But, mark my words, the toughest battle we have as a movement ahead of us is to change the way this economy is organised, because in marriage equality and in terms of the 8th Amendment, we weren't taking anything from anybody. But we're going after We're taking, collective bargaining means taking, so it means redistributing wealth. And this will be fought tooth and nail. So we need to be prepared for that fight. And this party isn't entitled to the name the Labour Party if we're not prepared to take that fight to every door in this country. And this is something we need to do.
Thanks, Jed. I know we're being told to kind of wrap this up because I think of the time, but I do want to let some of our panellists back in with, I'm just going to ask each of you one question to wrap up. In terms of like what Jed has said and in terms of building the movement, in terms of what John said, Ethel, can you maybe talk to us about some of the campaign? Because as chair of the Labour Trade Union Group, I would like to work with the movement, more with the party and the movement and members, but also for Brian in terms of the just transition, and I know it's not your area, but I know you have workers in Bordnamona who are looking at some issues around the redundancies there and having to reskill. And then Sheila, maybe the last question for you is in terms of how, as a party, can we work with the movement better? How can we work with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions in a bit stronger? So Ethel, I'll just go to you.
I'm going to directly respond to what Senator Nash said about collective bargaining, putting in place the legislative pieces, but maybe even going as far as a constitutional amendment. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that the referendum that was won earlier this year on the 8th Amendment had a campaign of at least 2 decades before it. Yeah. And feminists fought the hard fight for a long time, through some lonely times, to win the referendum. And really, sometimes I think when people analyse that referendum, they only analyse maybe the last 6 months of it from the Constitutional Convention. So I suppose I would say that if as a movement we are saying now that we want to address the constitutional issue, we'd want to start getting ready. And part of getting ready is to explain to people, to explain to working people the value of collective bargaining, because I don't think we do that very well as a movement. Even the people in our movement, in our unions, who have the benefit of collective bargaining don't always acknowledge that it is collective bargaining has delivered those higher wages or those better working conditions or sick pay schemes or pension schemes. So there's a lot to learn from the marriage referendum campaign, which also started decades ago, and the repeal the 8th, in preparing the ground, in having conversations with our members about the value of collective bargaining. I think that's what we would need to start doing. Maybe from this day forward, we need to start to think about rebranding, I would say, collective bargaining, because as a brand currently, it just doesn't run at all. Sure. If you went out onto the street to stop the people going to the match that John is waiting to go to, if you went out and you said to those workers, do you value collective bargaining? I think we'd be shocked by the answer. So let's just figure that bit of strategy into the legislative strategy, because the worst thing that could happen is that we would lose that constitutional referendum.
Okay. Thanks. Let's go to you, Brian.
Yep. Without getting into the specifics of Bordnamona, as you say, but to use it as a kind of a distant example, this isn't the first time we've come across this situation where a company changes its business model, or an economy leads it a different way. We represent our members to the highest of our ability, and we always like to think ourselves as very progressive in terms of the technical side. I mean, we Connect Trade Union is, or was, the technical engineer and electrical union. We find ourselves progressive when it comes to enhancing the skills of our workers. We want people to see union labour as the best labour. It's the safest labour, it's the most diligent, it's the most well-trained. And through continuous professional development, we push that agenda constantly. With the better employers, they'll have a buy-in. And at our conference 4 weeks ago, we agreed at our conference to pursue a charter for working excellence with contractors that are like-minded. Sorry, I'm saying contractors from my history, but employers. There are sectors where we don't have that dynamic, and we want to build it for the simple reason a good employer that employs good union labour is somebody we want to see continue in business. Yeah. The rest of them, if we have to meet them at the gates or fight them on the beaches, that's what we'll do, because we're a trade union. And we reserve the right to fight the good fight. But in terms of these skills deficits and shortages, if we can meet it to stave off the concept of a company going out of business and ultimately our members losing their jobs, we'll do whatever it takes for our members.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Sheila, just in terms of working together?
Well, I think one good example, it's important kind of to have a degree of optimism, because I think the last decade has been a hammering one in relation to things. Well, first of all, I do think that the pieces that Senator Nash referred to around 2015 have given, as you say, albeit a little bit, but I just want to divert to the Raising the Roof campaign, because we've been talking here about how you build movements as opposed to siloing individual things, and I think it's a very good example. Now, there was a lot of hard work, and Fiona, yourself, you were very directly involved in bringing the elements together. But I think we were all very pleasantly, first of all, gratified by the response of the trade union movement, the political parties, NGOs, and then the citizens of Ireland who turned out on the day. And that piece of legislation, or that motion, albeit, but it was a very good, powerful signal that if things work together, you can achieve something. And I think it is, I think it is those broader kind of pieces. Now, I agree with Ethel. I think it is very difficult to find the language, because the language is so polarised at the moment. So you have something called the squeezed middle. So therefore, who's ever underneath the middle, it's only because of them you wouldn't be so squeezed, because it's corporate welfare. Like we kind of buy off one against the other. The people who are in poverty traps are finding it very difficult, because they've been sold that if you've flexible work might cut down on your childcare costs, so you can work this number of hours so you can go home and mind your children. The future of work in relation to John's sector, where retail is going to go into the future, which has become invisible, and everybody in Ireland wants the lowest common denominator and the cheapest product to buy without any thought for where the workers are warehoused in areas. So, there is a lot of challenge, but it is the simple point about telling people that, first of all, from the workers' perspective, if you're in a union, it is a good place to be in terms of getting yourself out of that trap. But telling Irish society that actually it's a very civilised thing, because the taxpayer ultimately, if you keep people in poverty, you're going to have to continue to provide in a social protection net. But there is, I agree, I think there's great scope for much more collaborative work in terms of the lobbying, in terms of influencing policy and decision making, in terms of platforms as Raise the Roof has demonstrated without a shadow of a doubt, but maybe to re-examining the very simple messages that we have to do. But I would be optimistic. I think the demographic of this country have illustrated in recent campaigns, although long be it, that we can do that.
Thanks, Sheila. And I think the housing was a really good example of sharing policy and values from the Congress Charter and the Congress policy and the Labour Party. Jed, we're going to wrap the session up now. So, Jed, final word on this?
Look, I want to thank our colleagues for joining us and for enlightening us with their views. It's a relationship that I value personally and politically, and that this party very much values, and we want to build on that. We work day in, day out with one another. I had the pleasure of speaking at the Connect Trade Union Conference just a couple of short weeks ago. I've just about recovered. It was excellent socially as well as politically. And we spoke about the future. I mean, for us as a party, one of our important foundational documents, and one of the important foundational seminal documents in terms of the creation of this state, was the Democratic Programme, drafted by Tom Johnson, Colin Shannon, O'Brien and others. And it's very interesting. We had a discussion on Friday night at the Connolly Cafe, and I was contributing to that. And we were talking with Paula Gates about various versions of the document. And one of the earlier versions that Johnson wrote was very, very strong on trade union rights and collective bargaining, but got watered down by Sinn Féin and other elements, we'll say, that were active in society at the time. We still have that challenge, and that's our, I think, historic and fundamental mission. We differ sometimes as a movement. That's healthy, but we have more that unites us than divides us. I'm prepared, and I know everybody in this room and the party broadly is prepared to work with everybody here to try to make this society better, more just, more equal, and more decent. And we do that by working together on enhancing collective bargaining rights and looking to the future as well. We are, just in conclusion, working probably uniquely as a political party, because we are, I think, a party that, not just of protest, but of progress. And we take on the responsibility. We are looking very deeply at the challenges around the future of work, what that means for how businesses are organised, but more importantly, how we apply the historic wins of the labour movement in terms of minimum wages, in terms of minimum terms, conditions, legal frameworks around collective bargaining, how we apply that to new ways of working. And we can't be lax on that. This is happening today, as John, you know, in terms of retail and so on. And we've made some good starts in that around, for example, the Competition Amendment Act that myself, Ivana Bacik and Ethel worked on around collective bargaining rights for very exposed freelance workers, and the work we're doing with Brian around bogus self-employment, because independent contracting is going to become a deeper feature, I think, of the labour market, and we need to make sure there are protections there for people who are working hard for a living who need those protections. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Jed. And just before, a very warm applause for, I think, our panellists who are working on behalf of all workers in Ireland. This is not the last panel discussion. We're going to ask our next set of panellists to take the stage. I'm going to wrap up this session, but I have to, I think, entertain you for about a minute or two until we get the next set of panellists. I didn't agree to this at the start, but anyhow, I really appreciate your time to sit and talk to us, because the next group of panellists that we're going to talk with are actually trade union members, but also Labour Party members, and some of whom are putting themselves forward as councillors in elections. So they are, we're looking at people who are bringing the two together in terms of the work that they're doing for the party. And we'll hear their views on the decent work document, but also some of the issues that they face in their constituency, but also in their workplace, because they all work for the trade union movement. So I'll hand over to Jack for the minute.
Thanks, Fiona, for thank you. It just struck me that the numbers in the hall are depleting so rapidly that perhaps it would be better if we took decisions on these motions now, which I think are non-controversial. Ethel Buckley asked me outside, how did you manage as chair of the party to allow the issue of people's rights at work to be discussed at the death? And actually the reason is because unlike most other parties, all of them maybe, there's no need to convince anyone in this party on these issues. There's absolute unanimity on these issues. So just take motion number 92 in the name of Wicklow Constituency Council. All in favour, please show. All against? Absolute unanimity. Motion number 93 in the name of Sandyford Branch and Dublin Rathdown. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare both motions carried with absolute unanimity. Motion number 94 fell because there was no mover. Motion number 5 in the name of the Labour Trade Union section. All in favour, please show. All against? Again unanimous. I declare the motion carried. And motion number 96 in the name of the Gaeltacht Leitrim branch, Sligo Leitrim. All in favour, please show. All against? Again, I declare the motion carried. Thank you, Fiona. It's over to you. I'm even more efficient than I thought I was.
Okay, delegates, we welcome our second panel. I don't need to introduce you, Nash, again. So to my left is Grace Williams. Grace is a former Labour Youth Chair and also works for the Forza Trade Union and has been a long Labour member. For my sins. Next to Grace is Alison Gilland, and you'll know Alison is a Labour Party councillor in Dublin Bay North and Dublin City Council. Alison also works for the INTO and is very familiar with some of the issues around public sector workers, but also the issues around work in terms of her constituents. Next to Alison is Kevin Donoghue. Kevin's former president of USI and currently works for the Forza Trade Union as well, and I think he represents members in state enterprises. Yep. And finally we have Aideen Carberry. Aideen works for the SIPTU Trade Union, and Aideen is active in the Dublin South West constituency, and you'd be familiar with Aideen. She's been on the podium several times this weekend moving and speaking to motions. So this session we're really going to just talk about some of the issues within the document that the Labour Trade Union section and the policy committee and Jed has worked on in terms of, collective bargaining, bogus self-employment, and some of the issues we've already talked about. But I think I'll give each of the panellists an opportunity to hone in on a specific area of interest. So I'll probably start at the end of the panel, if that's okay. Aideen, you are working in SIP2 and around the issue of health, and it's something that you've looked at is public procurement. What does that mean in terms of workers, and what does that mean in terms of the people that you represent?
Okay, so first of all, I'd just like to apologise for the state of my voice at the moment. I had a bit too good of a night last night, but I'll do my best to speak as clearly as I can.
You're forgiven.
I suppose what I found interesting about the Decent Work document, and I suppose the area that I would be interested in would be the area of public procurement. What the document is calling on behalf of the Labour Party is looking for any sector that's getting contracts awarded through the public service to make sure that they're compliant with health and safety legislation, equality legislation, employment law, and to make sure that paying conditions are upheld within that paying conditions that are there within the sector are upheld as part of the contract. But for me personally, I suppose what I thought was the most important aspect of that, of the document and of the clause, was that we're actually calling on contractors who win contracts through public procurement policy, that they would show respect for the industrial relations machinery of the state. Myself, and I'm sure any of the colleagues here and some of the speakers before alluded to it as well, anyone that's used to representing workers within the public service or in sectors that, say, would traditionally win contracts through public procurement, they'll be very familiar with the challenges that we face when those types of, when you can have like rogue employers or difficult employers winning those contracts, because they have a tendency to undermine decent and robust, say, public service agreements that public unions work very hard to win on behalf of their members. And I suppose bringing it to the local, on South Dublin County Council, for example, the council does actually have a policy itself that it includes a social clause when awarding public contracts, but and I'm open to correction on this, but having looked into it somewhat, it actually doesn't seem to mention anything about workers, or doesn't really specifically look at upholding the rights of trade unions when awarding contracts through the local authorities. So I think that's something that actually we need to challenge on a local level as well, because I think it's important as people in this room that are not only trade unionists but involved in the Labour Party, that we would make it our job to go out and tell people the importance of those jobs being good, decent, unionised ones. A lot of people think it's nothing to do with them if a contractor that's a bit of a rogue employer wins a contract. It's our job to go out and actually educate people to say, look, no, it does affect you because it affects the standard of jobs in your locality.
Okay, thanks, Aideen. And I think it's really important that you've raised that issue, because the Labour Trade Union Group certainly want to work with councillors and other people in different constituencies to look at some of those issues. So I think that's something for the work programme in the future of that section. Kevin, can I ask you then about decent work? I know you're interested in the pillar of decent work itself. So do you want to talk to us about how that impacts on the people that you represent and maybe your future constituents in the next round of elections?
Yeah, well, I think it's great to see it as one of the key pillars in the document, because I suppose, and decent wages is another one. I think you can look at your pay slip at the end of the week or the end of the month, and you know whether or not your wage is decent, or you can talk about it. I think it's a little bit less tangible when it comes to talking about decent work, and I think that's a difficult issue to tackle. I think as a trade union organiser, one of the statements that I most frequently use and hate to use is that it's unfair, but it's not illegal for your employer to do that. Which is really problematic, and I think that employers far too frequently see legislation as a barrier to profit, as opposed to providing protections for both themselves and their employees, and it leads to the creation of companies who, like Uber or Deliveroo, who essentially the profit model requires that they exploit their worker in order to kind of generate massive profits, and I think that then bleeds into the general psyche of the workforce, or the culture of workforces. So you'll have people on 9-to-5 contracts who feel that they have to be in at 8 o'clock, they have to have lunch at their desk, and they can't leave till 6. So they're doing 6.5 days of work in 5 days. And then you have kind of your if and when worker that if they dare to join a union or dare to ask to be treated with respect, they're all of a sudden not needed as often. And I think, certainly in my experience, and I'm the organiser for Ryanair. Certainly in my experience, what I've for cabin crew, pardon me, I'm just going to get that in.
Congratulations on that.
In all the conversations that we have, they talk about decent work as opposed to the wage. That's the focus that they have, and what they seem to. Decent work is essentially a synonym for respect in the workplace for them, and it was something that struck me when we were talking to employees in there. I think we had 4 or 5 meetings before someone brought up how much they were being paid as a problem. It was always about how they were spoken to, how they were treated, the correspondence from companies. This is from a broad range of companies, but that's usually what we end up talking about. So that's, and the last point I suppose I'll make is that it's great to see Labour talking about it, and I think that the Labour Party talks about it in a way that other left-wing parties don't really talk about it, and they really delve into it, and it's good. It's essentially just good to see it as a core pillar. There. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll move on to Alison, because I think the issue of hours and security of hours and that sort of thing is something that you're particularly interested in. But also you might want to touch on the issue of pay inequality, because I know that affects young teachers as well as a whole cohort of different workers. So.
Yeah, I think John in the previous panel discussed very well the whole Duns and Tesco's issue around insecurity of hours, and what I would see, like I represent Dublin 17, Dublin 13, and a lot of my constituents will be working in Duns and Tesco's, and at the time they would have shared their stories about me, particularly around exactly what he said. If you try to stand up, then your hours are reduced, and we all know if your hours are reduced, you're not going to be able to make your bills. You're not going to be able, even on a short contract like that, to get a mortgage. Childcare is an issue. You get a phone call and you're called in, and you've got 2 kids that you have to suddenly find childcare for, and you're juggling. And it's a very, very precarious, insecure life, and you're working on a week-to-week, and you cannot see a secure livelihood. On the issue of pay inequality, I says in my own union, we suffer particularly bad from this, because unlike other public sector workers, we didn't suffer from the moratorium back in austerity. So we would have had teachers continuously coming into service and being paid at, and this is really important that it's understood, they're on a different salary scale. So it's an inferior salary scale, because some people say, oh, well, they are not being paid differently. Yes, they are, because their scale is different. So that's where the inequality lies. And we have recently stood up and said to the latest deal that's on the table, no, because it doesn't fully resolve it for every single teacher. And it's actually particularly cruel for the teachers that have suffered longest and hardest on it. And our challenge now is to stand as a collective, and I know the public consultants have also raised this today. Our colleagues in ASTI have to vote on it. But equality of income, equality of wages is really, really important. We've discussed, I think, gender equality as well, where women, particularly who take time out of the workforce, in any workforce, are almost discriminated against in a very subtle way when it comes to senior positions. We've also seen in bigger companies where we don't have collective bargaining an individualisation of wages. How many times have you seen a job ad and there's no wage or salary attached to it? Then it's up to you to go in and almost so the companies are pitting individuals against each other. Women are losing out because of their particular circumstances, and within the public sector where the state should be given the lead, we have pay inequality because we have inferior salary scales for our younger people.
And clearly that is something that the Labour Party are key to deliver in terms of economic inequality. It's something that's come up over the conference since Friday, that they're striving forward to ensure economic inequality is removed, because it's the only way to pull people out of poverty.
And it's that threshold of decency. And I do think because of our intrinsic link with the trade union movement, we are the only party that actually get this. Like, I've seen my colleagues, Sinn Féin colleagues on the council, and in the middle of an industrial dispute, they'll want to discuss it at council. And we all know, like, when you're in negotiations, and that sort of interference doesn't help. And I'm the chair of the Emergency Services Committee with Dublin Fire Brigade and Ambulance Services. And they're disrupting what is good industrial relations for a cheap political line in a newspaper. So absolutely our links with trade union movement and strengthening those links going forward. So that, to me, it's like two sides of the same coin. You vote for Labour and you're in a trade union.
Thanks, Alison. Can I now go to Grace, because you've been waiting patiently there, Grace. I know worker consultation is something that you're keen on in terms of the decent work agenda and what's in the document. So do you want to talk about the meaning of that in terms of your own members?
Yeah, and just from my own perspective, I'm going to approach this maybe slightly differently to my colleagues here, but just looking through the goals that are set out here, it just seems that this idea about social dialogue and consultation really is what we need to be looking at. I mean, my job as an organiser, it isn't a big, sexy national legislative role, maybe like the likes of Jed Nash would have had in terms of collective bargaining legislation or 0 hours or anything like that, Jed. But certainly I think it's one of the most important things. I think this idea that trade unions are disruptive and we're here to wreck people's heads and to go into bosses and slam our fists down on the tables is quite simply nonsense. I think our role really is to create a dialogue that is reasonable. It's to put across ideas that are measured, that will get our workers the best that we can. And I think really and truly ensuring that we have better protections to ensure social dialogue is the only way we can actually move forward with that. We have industrial relations mechanisms in this country which operate on a volunteer basis, and really and truly it makes it extremely difficult to get things done. You can be months organising in a workplace, asking people to join the union, explaining what it is we can do. We can organise around an issue. We can go into your management. This is how we can fix something. And generally, people aren't opposed to the idea of the trade union. What they're opposed to is, my boss is different. You've never come across a boss like mine, and they will not listen to you. And I see that in every single workplace I go into. That is what members tell me. And their bosses aren't any different. It really is just that they do not believe that their boss will engage with the union. And I think if we, as a party and as a movement, go about ensuring that we have better mechanisms to ensure that employers are forced to engage with union representatives and engage with their employees, we'll not only have a better workforce where workers are happier, we'll have a lower turnover of staff, but we'll also just have a better dialogue overall as society. So I really think this inclusion, obviously this document is extremely comprehensive. It covers such a wide variety of things, but I suppose from a selfish point of view, when I'm going in to negotiate, this really and truly is what I'm looking for.
Okay, thanks, Grace. Jed, can I ask you to respond to some of the issues that have been raised?
Thanks, guys. I'm really interested in what Grace was referring to around dialogue and social dialogue in general. We've dealt in some detail at the earlier session around what we need to do as a movement around enhancing collective bargaining rights. But we've been very consistent in the party over the last 2.5 years since we left government around the need for social dialogue fora in our state in general. I mean, it's the sign of a mature democracy where we can bring employers, trade unions and other interest groups on some occasions together under a social dialogue umbrella. What we proposed was a Labour Employer Council. It used to be around in the 1960s, 1970s to deal with some of the big issues in our society. For example, we have said that wouldn't it be a good idea if we could bring some of those main stakeholders together around climate change and so on, because clearly we're missing our targets and this government has no interest in addressing climate action in a way that we would like to see it addressed. So that's a kind of broader point. And there's a reason, I guess, why we didn't have that kind of forum during our own period in government, because, of course, trade unions knew that we had their back when we were in government. There's a reason why, notwithstanding the fact that they were very difficult years for some people who are representing workers, we did our very best with our colleague Brendan Howland to ensure that there was that flow of decency in the public service. We weren't outsourcing or privatising public services. We weren't compulsorily making workers redundant, and that's something I think we should be very, very proud of in very, very difficult circumstances. But I guess the point that I'm making is now that the Labour Party isn't in government, there isn't that route for trade unionists into government, because Fine Gael see trade unions as a problem and something to be beaten, not something to be, not an organisation, a civic society organisation to work with for the benefit of everybody. I'll just conclude in this. I've probably gone on a little too much in response to what Grace said. I think we need, as an organisation, as a party and as a movement, to understand that when we make political decisions or develop policy, we need to stick with it. And we need to draw that line between our relationship with the trade union movement, the Labour Party, how things get done, how legislation gets enacted, and how new regulations are introduced and so on. And I want to give you a really important example. The work we're seeing going on at the moment around the proposed prohibition of zero-hour contracts, of regulating low hours work in general, actually came from Labour Youth. And Labour Youth can take great satisfaction in developing that idea with John Burton and with me around 2013-2014 to better regulate precarious work in Ireland. So you can be very proud, Grace, and Jack Eustace and others, some people who are in this room, we're keeping with that. And we're now finally going to see that bearing fruit very, very shortly. So that's the kind of action we take in this party, meaningful action that means something to people. We don't just hang around with placards and sit at home with our crayons writing on placards. We're a party of progress, not protest. We make a difference. And thanks to Grace and others, we've made that difference.
Thanks, Jed. I know I have to wrap up, so I'm just going to ask our panellists one final very quick question for you all to consider. And it's a selfish question as chair of the Labour Trade Union Group. How do we convince your members to become Labour Party members, and how do we build those links back to all trade union members? So, Grace.
Wow. I mean, it's a very simple question, obviously.
There's a prize.
Look,
prize. The best answer.
So no pressure. Look, it's not an easy task, and I think everyone in this room is well aware of the challenges we have in rebuilding that kind of link. To be fair to the Labour Party, I think we have done incredible work so far on this, particularly with the likes of Jed's nomination from Congress. I think that kind of work is hugely important. Realistically, I think it goes the other way. If we have trade unions who are working on particular issues approaching the Labour Party, ensuring that the Labour Party is supporting the likes of the Lloyd's workers or whatever, if it's new entrants, whoever it might be, I think that kind of support is really appreciated because it is extremely difficult to get public support for union campaigns. So I think even having a profile through the Labour Party and through some of our public representatives is hugely important.
Thanks, Grace. Alison?
Yeah, I would support that as well. I suppose, speaking personally, like in my own union, I think there are 3 or 4 of us that are out as Labour Party members, advocates, activists. I'm actually
biggest culprit.
I'm actually running for the General Secretary of my union at the moment, Sheila has retired. And I would hope if I won that, it would send out a very strong message to members that, you know, the head of our union is an active Labour Party member, and so there's a value there that might bring with it. It also is a challenge, because I know some of them wouldn't. But it's very much like using every opportunity we have to highlight the work that Labour does that is relevant to our own sector, and also working with them to progress issues. And I think the big thing, I think Ethel said it, it's about acting as a movement. Grace and I had a conversation out there about school secretaries, forced to have a campaign for school secretaries. School secretaries work in our schools.
Make your
we
schools work.
should be joining together so that we have all INTO, ASTI, TUI members supporting our school secretaries, not just for pay, that they're full-time, fully trained, and together a sector of workers can have a better and decent work.
Thanks, Alison. Kevin?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest task in relation to it is convincing people of trade union values and the power of trade unions. I think once you do that, it's pretty easy to connect the dots between why you should be in a trade union and vote in Labour or become a member of the Labour Party. I think the challenge is around convincing, because I think there's too many young workers out there in particular who see joining a trade union as an adversarial act. It might get them in trouble. In a previous job that I worked in, they were given out about the fact that they had to work 8 to 6 and eat lunch at their desk and all that kind of stuff. We were given out for about an hour. I was like, we should join a trade union. And one of the people in the group was, no, I'd rather get promoted. You know, so like that was, so I think once, and there is a difficult task in convincing people of the values of trade unions and the power of trade unions, but I think that once you do that, it's I would hope an easier path to membership of the Labour Party as well.
Thanks, Kevin. And Aidan, final
Yeah,
word?
I suppose I just agree a lot with some of the points that Alison made there, particularly around the piece about encouraging members from one and the other organisations to become active in the other. If you're a member of the Labour Party and you're active and you're a member of a union, well, why don't you run for your union's NEC? Why don't you run for an officer board? And vice versa. If you're active in your union, well, look, why don't you get involved in your local Labour constituency? I think that would be a very good way of linking up the two organisations. Again, we should be acting as a movement. Our goals should be aligned, and in fairness, I think they are. And it's just about making sure that members are aware of it. And also, I do think there's further work that can be done around, I suppose, activating people. For example, one of the things I did when I was chair of Labour Youth, I actually ran an organising workshop for our members to actually talk about organising the trade union in your own workplace. Because as young people, they tended to be in sectors that were, you know, low union density, low union membership. We encourage people to say, well, look, if somebody else is not going to do this for you, so we're going to give you the tools to go out and help them get your colleagues on board and join a union. So it's about encouraging active participation in both organisations.
Excellent. Thanks, Aidan. I just wanted to say, Jed, do you need a final word?
No, I think this room's booked by somebody else after 2 o'clock, so we better.
Okay.
I think we'll conclude.
Okay. I just want to say thanks to the panel. If you give them a warm round of applause.
Well done, Fiona.
Thank you, Fiona and Jed, and thank you, comrades, for a very interesting and stimulating discussion. It's a pity the time became so compressed. We have concluded all of the business we were scheduled to deal with in the Standing Orders Report number 1. All of those seeking to be heard have been accommodated, albeit a bit haphazardly from time to time. We have dealt with our business, we have taken our decisions, and we now come to the conclusion of our conference. And it falls to me to conclude the conference, and I just want to say one or two things. The first is that, as we all know in this room, we emerged from our participation in the last government against the background of the biggest economic collapse in any developed country in the world, in which we were outnumbered by more than 2 to 1 by probably the most right-wing party in the country, although it's hard to distinguish between the two big ones as to who should have that accolade, and against a background in which the economy was in the hands of the Troika, and at the outset our budget deficit was higher than any other country in the Eurozone, higher even than Greece. And we emerged from that quite mauled, not just in terms of electoral support, but in terms, I think, of our self-confidence. And I think it's fair to say that a great many of us doubted ourselves and doubted whether we were in an organisation that was still true to the values which it had been founded to serve. And we stayed. But it's important to recognise that we didn't stay for reasons of nostalgia, or reasons, as would be the case in relation to myself, that it was too late to go anywhere else. We didn't stay in the way that people stick with an old football club, even though it's not winning anything anymore, out of a kind of a sense of loyalty that is almost irrational. And I'm very clear myself, absolutely clear, as I have been throughout the whole dreadful experience. I am absolutely clear as to the reasons why I stayed. And I stayed for these 3 reasons. I stayed because our party, Connolly's party, has been to the forefront of every single incremental step which was achieved in the struggle for equality since 1912 on this island. And I stayed, notwithstanding the fact that it's treated cynically. I stayed because every single time, extending back to the general election of 1918, when our party was forced to make the choice between its own electoral interests and the interests of the people of this country, every single time, bar none, we opted for the interests of the people of this country. And actually, there is no other party that can truthfully say that. There are some of them, to be fair, who have placed the interests of the people first from time to time, and some of them who have never, ever done it, and never, ever will, by the way. And the third reason why I stayed was because I recognised, given my training over 44 years now approaching in the trade union movement, that if we opt every time we meet obstacles, and every time we have to make very hard choices, and every time we make mistakes, and every time it's hot and people are shouting at us, and worse, if we opt every single time to run off and declare our independence, or form a new party, untainted by the compromises that we had to make, well, then we'll never, ever achieve anything for the people we were founded to serve. Because fragmentation on the left, and the crucial lesson of history, is that fragmentation on the left allowed the Nazis in Germany in 1933. And it allowed them in, the fascists, in Brazil last week. And we cannot afford fragmentation. Now, there was I think, a rather naive, no criticism of anyone, attempt immediately after the debacle of the last election to launch a rebuild. That's not the way history unfolds. Because before you rebuild, you have to rediscover your soul, your confidence, your self-belief, and more importantly, your belief in the comrades around you. And that takes time. That takes time. And I think that this conference, not just because I chaired it, by the way, so successfully, I think that this conference represents the critical moment of transition, the critical watershed in the journey to rediscover our souls. And I think that that was signalled in the speech delivered by Brendan Howlin, our party leader, last night. I have attended every single conference, every single one, of this party since Wexford in 1976. And I can't remember a better speech, even the ones delivered by Frank Kluski. I can't remember a better speech than the speech delivered by Comrade Brendan Howland here last night. And I think it signals the moment we rediscovered our soul. It's not going to reflect, by the way, in the Red Sea poll. That's not yet what it's about. That's not yet what it's about. But I learned long, long ago, and I've held many positions of leadership in our movement, from when I was a shop steward at 18 years of age. I learned long, long ago that the decisive ingredient in the formulation and execution of a political strategy or an industrial strategy in any crisis or over any period of crisis or over any period at all is the absolute confidence, the absolute belief that we are correct. And I believe that in the context of the challenge that presents and the opportunities that are opening up, as we approach the centenary of the democratic programme upon which the War of Independence was fought and won, I believe that we in Connolly's party are correct. And I look forward, comrades, to working with you every day of the year which lies ahead between now and our next conference, in doing what we were founded to do, to win for working people and to realise the possibility of an egalitarian future. And I look forward to doing it every day, and I know that you will too. It only remains for me, comrades, now to discharge a few rudimentary but important functions. I want to extend on behalf of all of us our deepest appreciation and thanks to the staff of the hotel here who provided excellent service. I want equally to thank the security staff here who protected us not just from others but from ourselves all over the weekend. I want to thank our own stewards who discharged all their various roles. I want to thank the Conference Organisation Committee. I want to thank all the Labour Party staff who laboured here throughout. All incidentally trade union members, by the way. All of them. I want to thank the returning officer and the volunteers who conducted and oversaw the count. I want to thank Dermot Lacey and the tellers. You didn't have much to do, Dermot, but you were there to do it. I want to thank Fionnuala Richardson, if she's still here. Fionnuala, the Chair of Standing Orders, and the members of the Standing Orders Committee. And I don't know, Fionnuala, how many years you're doing Chair of Standing Orders. I can't remember. Don't say. But I want to thank you and your comrades most sincerely, steering me through another intrepid weekend. I want to thank all the members who attended here, and all the observers who attended here, and all those who spoke and contributed. And I want again to apologise to those who I treated rather harshly. Don't blame me, blame that bloody machine there. And I want to thank the party spokespersons who addressed us and responded to the various debates and so on. And I want to thank as well Brian McDowell, the General Secretary, who's had the very tough job of pulling it all together. And incidentally, by the way, Brian and I probably weren't the best of friends in the past. We still aren't. We don't agree on everything. But there are not too many people, very, very few, in the history of our movement, in fact probably no one, who was stuck with the task that Brian was stuck with after the last general election. And I want to say, notwithstanding some differences we have, I want to acknowledge the way he has discharged his entire role as General Secretary through that very difficult period. And I want to thank all the people I've forgotten to thank, because there's always someone who approaches you and said, "What about me?" So they're all covered in that. And now, as I draw our conference to a close, I want to invite Councillor Rob O'Donoghue, who hails from...
Sorry, Jack, could I, on behalf of the people who are left here, thank you for an excellent chairing.
Thank you. Thank you. Those of you who are here next year will understand if one delegate is allowed a few minutes extra. That was a very skillful intervention, Jerry. Thank you very much. But now it falls to me to conclude, to draw the conference to a close. And in doing so, as I said, I want to call on Councillor Rob O'Donoghue, who hails from the Fingal constituency and the electoral area of Lusk and Rush. They produce very good people there, I can tell you. Where we have held our seat for longer than I can remember. And Rob now holds that seat, and I'm delighted that it has fallen to somebody of Rob's integrity and strength of character to continue a tradition that extends back for a very, very long time. Let's stand for the red flag, comrades. I declare the conference closed. Rob.
Always an unenviable position following himself. But I'll give it a go. Sure, the words are in the book, or in the standing orders. Thank you, everybody, for making this a brilliant conference. Sure, we'll plough on with this. Right. The people's flag is deepest red. It sheltered oft our martyred dead. And ere the limbs grew stiff and cold, our heart's blood dyed its every fold. So raise the scarlet standard high, beneath its shade we live and die. Though cowards cringe and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. Look round, the Frenchman loves his phrase, the sturdy German sings its praise. In Moscow vaults its hymns are sung, Chicago swells the surging throng. So raise the scarlet standard high, beneath its fame we live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. It waved above our infant might, when all ahead seemed dark as night.
It witnessed many a deed and vow. We must not change its colour now. So wave the scarlet standard high. Beneath its shade we live and die. Though cowards cringe and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. It suits today the meek and base, whose minds are filled with pelf and place, to cringe before the rich man's frown and haul the sacred emblem down. So wave the scarlet standard high. Beneath its shade we live and die. Though cowards cringe and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. It well recalls the triumphs past. It gives a hope of peace at last. The banner bright, the symbol plain of human right and human gain. So raise the starlit standard high. Beneath its shade we live and die. Though cowards cringe and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. With heads uncovered swear we all to bear it onwards till we fall. Come dungeons dark or gallows grim, this song will be our fighting hymn. So raise the starlit standard high. Beneath its shade we live and die. Though cowards cringe and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here.
Closest to X Factor I'm ever going to get. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Brett.